Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Awakened a Summoning Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. All men are not created equal. Izuku learned that brutal truth when he was only 4 years old, watching his best friend Katsuki Bakugo Kaken manifest his quirk. The explosions were loud, bright, dangerous. Everything a hero could want. Everything Izuku would never have. For months after, he clung to hope. He followed every half-baked suggestion his parents threw at him. He breathed in deep, straining to feel the heat build in his throat like his father said. He stared at pencils and toys, arms stretched forward until it ached, begging them to move like his mother's telekinetic touch. Nothing happened. The silence in their home grew heavier with every failed attempt. His parents argued every night, louder than the walls were thick. His father drank more, cursed more. His mother stopped trying to shield him from the shouting and just curled tighter into herself. When they finally took him to the doctor, Izuku still held on to that tiny spark of hope, like a child clutching a blanket that no longer kept the cold away. "I'm sorry, kid," the doctor said, flat and final. "That extra joint in your pinky toe? It means you're quirkless. You'll never develop a quirk." The ride home felt like it stretched for hours. Neither of them spoke. Once they stepped inside, Izuku asked, voice trembling, "Mama, the doctor's wrong, right? I can still be a hero, can't I?" She didn't look at him when she answered. "Go to your room," she snapped, her voice sharp and unfamiliar, the way broken glass sounds under a shoe. Everything changed after that. His father left first, slamming the door behind him, muttering about null kids and wasted years, accusing Inko of cheating and blaming her for everything he'd lost. She stayed, but something in her eyes was different now. Dimmer. Like she couldn't look at him without seeing the shattered pieces of her life. He really tried. He looked up self-defense classes, trying to prepare for the life he dreamed of. She refused to let him go too dangerous, she said. He found a flyer for a first aid course. She threw it away, too much stress, too many late hours. "You don't have the stamina for that kind of thing," she said with an apologetic smile that never reached her eyes. Every time he tried to grow, she clipped him back down, like she was pruning a flower that might dare bloom without her permission. At school, the news spread fast. And Kaken, his best friend, his first friend, turned venomous. "You're useless, Deku," he spat, twisting Izuku's name into something dirty, something meant to hurt. The other kids followed, and the teachers either pitied him or ignored him. One saw him as fragile glass, refusing to let him do anything but jog laps. The other saw a failure, convinced a null like him could only cheat his way through tests. Izuku still remembered that day clearly, being dragged to the front of class, his pants yanked down, a ruler snapping against his skin over and over until he admitted something he never did. 50 strikes before he broke. He could hardly sit afterward. He learned from it. Learned how to game the tests, how many answers to get wrong to avoid attention. Learned how to fake smiles, to bite his tongue, to keep his head down. Heroes, he told himself, needed to know how to endure. How to take a hit. How to cry only when no one could see. If he couldn't be All Might, he could be someone else. Someone in the shadows. Someone useful. He stomped down his anger. He buried his hope under layers of planning and quiet desperation. He silenced the part of him that still wanted. Until the day everything cracked. He was 14 when it happened. When Kaken screamed those words that would echo for the rest of his life. "If you want to be a hero so bad, I know a shortcut. Jump off the roof and pray you get a quirk in your next life." Izuku laughed, at first an ugly, broken sound. But the laugh didn't last. Not when he was alone again. Not when the numbness settled in. He wasn't even surprised Kaken had said it. Not really. He tried to be Kaken's friend again, but nothing would stop his once friend from seeing him as useless, and when he thought about it, really thought about it, they weren't friends. They hadn't been in a very long time. He could admit it now as he trudged down the stairs to retrieve his notebook. Kaken had ceased to be the moment that he'd been diagnosed quirkless. No, now all he had was Katsuki, and Katsuki didn't want him, wouldn't care if he ceased to be. It hurt. But it was just another emotional hurt in a series of emotional hurts. He pushed it down with every other feeling. He didn't hear the sounds of the street. Didn't notice the wind shift. Didn't hear the sewer grate moving. He was too focused on the hurt he still felt. "You're my hero, kid," a voice said, warm and reassuring. And then, the taste of sewer and the smell of something rotten, and he tried to thrash and fight, do something, anything to stop his death. Though he didn't know why he was doing that. It wouldn't be a swan dive off the roof, but if he was going to go out, at least someone cared. Someone believed in him. The darkness closed in. When Izuku came to, he felt something soft and unfamiliar under him. His vision swam, but it cleared as he registered a set of strange, bunny-shaped bangs hovering above him. "Not all might?" he gasped, reaching for his notebook. His heart skipped when he saw that it was already signed. "Good to see you're alive. Now I have to be going, citizen." Izuku's hand shot out, grabbing All Might's leg before he could take off. "Wait, All Might. I need to ask you something." The number one hero's eyes widened in surprise, then he sighed. "Hey, I love my fans, but this is a bit much. Let go, kid." Izuku's grip tightened. "I can't. If I do, I'll die." With a reluctant sigh, All Might landed on a rooftop, looking down at him. "Please, All Might, I just need to ask one thing. Can someone like me, someone without a quirk, ever become a hero like you?" All Might stared at him for a long moment, then his face softened with the weight of his response. "You can't become a hero like me. The truth is, it's impossible. Some villains can't be defeated without a quirk. Without one, you won't survive this world. I'm sorry, but that's the truth." The words hit harder than any punch he'd ever taken. His chest felt heavy, his eyes burning with tears he couldn't stop. And he didn't even notice that All Might left, until he looked, and of course, the hero was gone. It shouldn't hurt. All Might had more important things he had to do. And he had gotten the answer he was looking for. All Might had given him a perfectly valid reason for why he could never be a hero. It was like the world had finally confirmed what he'd always suspected, that he was nothing. That he was worthless. That he was just a Deku. It didn't hurt. It didn't. The anger, the hurt, the pain. All of it buzzed in his head like a swarm of bees. His tears streamed down his face, not just because of All Might's rejection, but because it felt like his entire life had been leading him here. It wasn't just All Might's words, it was everyone else's. He was quirkless. He would never be good enough. Izuku closed his eyes, letting his feelings explode out in the only way his body could understand. He felt feverish hot, his vision blurring, as he pulled his shoes from his feet and climbed the protective railing around the building he'd been left on. He took one last, longing look at the sky and wished with all his heart that things were different. Wished that someone, anyone, would come to save him. There was almost a shimmer to the sky, a different blue, almost like a sapphire, and then something knocked into him. That someone would prove them all wrong. That someone, anyone, would see him. And then he felt something slam into him, and he felt the breath being knocked from his chest, and then he felt his head hit the concrete with a sickening crack, before everything went black. Splinter stood alone in the dojo, the familiar scent of incense and polished wood curling around him like the lingering memory of an old friend. It was quiet now, truly quiet. The kind of quiet that came not from absence, but from peace. The shredder was gone. New York was safe. His sons were thriving. Leonardo had grown into a natural leader, calm and composed even under fire. Raphael had tempered his rage with purpose, often working alongside Casey as protectors of their city. Michelangelo, free-spirited and joyous, had found a place with the justice force, his creativity no longer stifled. And Donatello, his brilliant, inquisitive mind, was now studying in the world above, attending classes among humans for the first time. Each had carved a path all their own. It was everything Splinter had ever wanted. And yet, a low hum of disquiet stirred beneath his fur. His body ached in ways he could no longer ignore. His meditation sessions were interrupted more and more by tremors in his limbs, or moments of fog so thick he lost track of time. His sons had not noticed he had ensured that. He still moved with displacement, spoke with wisdom, and guided when needed. But he felt it. A slipping. Like a rope fraying one strand at a time. His mind, it wasn't what it used to be. He'd seen this before, in the elderly humans he once watched during his early days of mutation, men and women slowly consumed by confusion, forgetfulness, by the betrayal of their own minds. Back then it was survival. He'd snatched food with trembling paws, ashamed but desperate. If his master had seen him then. He closed his eyes. Honor, he thought, clinging to the word as though it might anchor him. He would not burden his sons with this. They had given him so much more than he ever believed he deserved. They had grown strong and kind despite the chaos of their youth. They were ready to face the world without him. So tonight he would go. Not in defeat, but in purpose. He would seek the Ancient One, perhaps find peace at last, and prepare to join Master Yoshi when the time came. The lair was quiet. It was perfect. No long goodbyes, no teary farewells. Only silence. He walked through the lair one last time. Past the dojo where they had trained, sweat and laughter mingling. Past the television screens, where they argued over pizza and movies. Past each of their rooms, each carrying the scent and spirit of the boy who called it home. He knelt at the shrine in his room. A candle flickered before the small photo of Yoshi, and Splinter offered a prayer. Let them live full lives. Let them find happiness. Let them remember me not as I fade, but as I was. He folded into meditation. His body protested, joints stiff and sore, but his breath came steady. Then something shifted. It was subtle at first. A tremble in the air. A strange tug at his senses. The candle flickered wildly, and then was gone. Splinter's eyes opened just in time to see light blinding, colorless, and then nothing. He was falling. But not through the familiar dark of the sewers. The sky above him was wrong, painted in colors he didn't recognize. Wind whipped around him as he tumbled toward a rooftop too fast, no control, and he braced for impact. He landed with a jarring thud. Pain flared up his spine, old bones protesting violently. But worse was the sound, a crack, sharp and sickening, and then a groan beneath him. His heart sank. There, beneath his paws, lay a child. A human child. Fragile. Wild green hair framed a tear-streaked face, eyes closed, body limp. No! Splinter knelt beside the boy, trembling paws brushing over him. No blood on the head, good. No obvious breaks. But there were other injuries. Faint bruises on the wrists. A cut lip. Old scars that spoke of long-term harm. And then he saw it. A hand-shaped burn on the boy's shoulder. He went still. A fury deeper than any he'd felt in years coiled in his chest. This child had already known suffering. And now, because of him, he had suffered more. The fog in Splinter's mind lifted, cleared by purpose. He would not fail this boy. Lifting him gently, ignoring his own pain, Splinter moved. He had no idea where he was, only that this was not his world. The air smelled wrong, the sounds of the city unfamiliar, the very feel of the place off. But instinct served him well. He found an old sewer access nearby, and through it, a desolate beach, forgotten and quiet. At the edge sat an abandoned camper van, half swallowed by dunes and rust. It would do. Inside, it was dusty but sheltered. He laid the child on the small bed, covering him with a blanket scavenged from a storage bin. Splinter himself curled on the floor beside him, worn to the bone. As sleep came for him, he stared at the boy's chest rising and falling, and made a silent vow. He had been prepared to leave home to die with honor. But now honor demanded something else. He would protect this child. He would learn who hurt him. He would make it right. Because he was, above all else, a father. And this child, no matter how strange this new world was, needed one. Inko knew she wasn't a good mother. Maybe she never had been. Maybe it started long before the diagnosis, before the doctor sat her down with that rehearsed sympathy and told her what her son would never be. She hadn't wanted children. Not really. But the world didn't like women who said that out loud. Society had a way of staring you down until you flinched, until you bought the lie that motherhood would fulfill you, define you. That without a child, you were incomplete. Selfish. So she gave in. And when Izuku was small chubby cheeks, big green eyes, fingers that clutched her shirt like he couldn't bear to be apart, she told herself it was fine. That she could love him enough to become the kind of mother he needed. She had tried. But then came the comparisons. Katsuki was louder, bolder, always leading the pack. Even when he shoved Izuku into the dirt or screamed at him for existing, people still praised him. And Mitsuki never stopped bragging. All she ever heard was the same things. Izuku? He's such a sweet boy. He tries so hard. He's very polite. They never said anything like, he'll be a great hero, like they did Katsuki. They never said, you're sure to have the comfy life when that one gets married, like they did Katsuki. All she ever heard was praise for Katsuki, and it burned. It burned to know that her son was somehow less than. And when the doctor said, Quirkless, it wasn't news. It was a funeral bell. And now? Now, with his bed cold and empty, his shoes still neatly lined by the door, his drawers untouched now, all she felt was relief. Shameful, bitter relief. If that made her a monster, so be it. But the lie had been choking her for years, and she was tired of dying quietly beneath it. She cried, of course. That part wasn't fake. But what she felt more than anything else was this tight, crushing, freeing release. She didn't have to watch him fail anymore. She didn't have to pretend she believed he could survive a world built to crush boys like him. And if he never came back? Maybe she could finally start over. He awoke to heat, a blistering, wrong kind of heat. Slowly, Splinter cracked open his eyes and remembered. His aching body tensed as he felt a forehead pressed against his side, far too warm. At some point during the night, the boy he'd landed on had moved from the moth-eaten mattress in the back of the camper van to curl up beside him. His muscles screamed in protest as he gently lifted the boy, but the child felt light. Too light. And too still. It had been a long time since he'd woken up to another body curled beside him in the cold. Long, unforgiving New York winters had taught his sons to stay close, huddled together for warmth. He tried to push that memory aside. But this heat wasn't right. Turtles didn't get fevers, at least not in the human sense. When his sons had fallen ill, they'd slipped into deep slumbers. Later, Donatello would explain it as a form of hibernation. But this this human child was burning up. Splinter didn't know much about human biology. What he did know came from faint memories of his master, brief visits from April and Casey, and the books Donatello had collected. But he knew this. Fevers like this could kill. He needed help. A hospital. A doctor. Even a police officer. But something told him it wasn't that simple. This wasn't New York anymore. He remembered the flash of light. The rooftop. The moment everything had shifted. It felt like the ultimate Draco again, like being torn out of reality and dropped somewhere else. But none of that mattered right now. Not compared to the tiny fist clinging to his fur. The boy stirred, eyes glassy and confused. And then, in broken, accented Japanese, "Dad? Please don't leave me, Dad. I'm sorry I'm useless, please, I'll do anything, just don't go." Splinter's heart clenched. For a moment, he didn't see the boy, he saw 4 young turtles crying out for comfort. And his anger flared not at the child, but at whoever had allowed him to reach this state. "You are safe," he said firmly, brushing damp hair from the boy's face. "I won't leave my son. You're ill, that is all. Sleep now." The boy let out a whimper and slipped back into fevered dreams. Splinter sighed. He hadn't been to Japan in years. Not since he'd brought his sons to the ninja tribunal for training. The last time before that had been to return his master's ashes to the Ancient One. Each time, he'd kept to the shadows, wary of the way locals stared at him, thinking him a yokai. His sons had been mistaken for Kappa. But shadows were familiar to him. He could manage this. Carefully, he slipped from the camper van and out into the cool night air. The beach was strewn with garbage. In the distance, dim lights shimmered, signs of a nearby city. Cities meant people. And people meant pharmacies. He stuck to the alleys, reading signs, moving quickly under the cover of darkness. Japan was not like America. Pharmacies weren't fortified behind bulletproof glass and steel grates. The lock on the back door yielded with a swift kick. But easier access didn't mean there weren't alarms. He hurried down the aisles, scanning quickly. Fever reducers both for children and adults. Bandages. Antiseptic. All stuffed into the pockets of his yukata. April had insisted the robe have pockets the last time his sons dragged him shopping. He'd thank her for that when he got home if he got home. He was halfway to the door when the air shifted. His instincts flared danger. He dropped instantly, barely dodging a white cloth that cracked like a whip against his shoulder. Pain exploded through his arm. He grunted, twisted, deflected a second strike with his walking staff. The attacker pressed in fast, agile, deliberate. Dressed all in black, wild hair floating as if underwater, red eyes gleaming beneath yellow goggles. A mystic ninja? No, something else. But trained. Splinter countered blow after blow, pushed into the street under the moonlight. He hadn't faced a ninja like this in years, one that wasn't his son or Orakusaki. He parried a kick, caught in the scarf, yanked hard to break free. Both of them stumbled. He hit the ground first, something deep in his hip giving a warning jolt. But he rolled free. Every strike had its counter. Every motion its echo. But this wasn't a fight he could win, not now, not while a child waited for him, burning with fever. So he ran. Low and fast, on all fours, the way he had when fighting the Cyber Shredder. It was faster, unexpected, and it worked. The black-haired man didn't expect it. A shout rang out behind him, but Splinter didn't stop. It darted into an alley, dove behind a garbage bin, and held his breath. Flattened. Still. Footsteps above. Rooftop pursuit. But rooftops couldn't see into shadows like this. He waited. Counted heartbeats. Then nothing. He crept back to the beach, heart pounding. The boy was waiting. That was all that mattered. It had been a quiet shift. Too quiet. And Eraserhead should have known better. The HeroNet alert pinged softly in his ear. Break in at a pharmacy. Only 2 blocks from where he was patrolling. Close enough to check without breaking stride. Shota dropped silently from a rooftop, scarf already moving, zero hesitation. The figure by the side door moved fast, too fast for someone caught off guard. His scarf snapped out. Finn. Quit running, he barked, frustration creeping in. But the intruder moved like smoke. Slipped into shadows, disappeared. Shota landed, scanning the street, eyes narrowing. Whoever that was, they were trained. No wasted motion. Precise. He adjusted his scarf, breathing low. He'd report it as a missed capture. But he had a feeling this wasn't over. Not yet. Nedzu never told his pup Shoyuta that he had put some protections in place after Oboro's demise. How could he? His pup had always been so distrustful of others, and when he'd learned that Shoyuta had been fully intending to work until he dropped as penance for Oboro's death, well, he was glad he'd signed those guardianship papers long ago. Back when Shoyuta had blazed his way through all the hero students in his year with a chip on his shoulder and nowhere to live. It had taken months of keeping his pup close, spiking Shota's coffee with extra-strength sleeping pills before the boy had shown signs of being somewhat better. So, of course, he had put the camera and the GPS tracker on his pup's uniform. Because he wasn't stupid. He knew what Shota meant to him. And he knew he couldn't allow his pup to be out on the streets without some assurances. Chio could tell him he was overreaching as much as she wanted. But even she agreed. Even if Shota was an adult, he was at best a barely functioning adult. To keep some of Shota's privacy intact, he didn't check the footage at all times. Only when his software alerted him, when Shota encountered something he couldn't handle, or was injured, or if something pinged as worth his attention. The software had pinged. And as he watched Shota respond to a simple robbery, he couldn't help the spit take. Because, as an animal with a quirk, he didn't judge others with mutational quirks. That would be silly. And yet, he didn't think it was a mutational quirk. Because there was something he never told anyone. Those with mutational quirks had features like animals, and instincts like animals, but they also had human features. Just like Gang Orca's relatively normal-looking human hands, if you ignored the coloring. The still shot he took showed nothing like that. Now, there were other animals with quirks but none like him. And logically, he knew that he'd been born in a litter, the only one with the intelligence Quirk the scientist had wanted. And logically, He knew there had to have been other experiments before him, but he'd never expected that any of those predecessors had survived. He had thought that none but him had. He can't help touching his scar with a trembling paw. If this was a predecessor like he believed, then he wasn't alone. He had to find them. When he'd still believed desperately that there was a chance, no matter what that awful doctor had said, Izuku had turned to the internet. He'd only just learned how to bypass the child-safe settings on the computer. But he'd already known doctors could be wrong. So he researched. Obsessively. That's how he found the stories. A kid whose quirk hadn't appeared until he ate pineapple for the first time. Another who'd been told he was quirkless until the moment he was nearly hit by a car. A handful of tales that seemed almost magical, quirks manifesting from emotions, stress, hunger, even heartbreak. Wild rumors, urban legends about a bogeyman who could steal and give quirks at will. Those posts were often deleted within hours of appearing. But he'd seen enough to cling to the idea. So he'd begged his mom for fruit they normally never bought. Pineapple, of course. A few others he couldn't stand but choked down anyway, hopeful. Nothing happened except a stomachache and a fresh wave of disappointment. Still, he'd kept searching. Clinging to hope. After all, both his parents had quirks. For 4 generations back, even. That had to mean something. But years passed. And every birthday made it harder to believe he was just a late bloomer. And then came the rooftop. He'd meant to jump. Meant it. Not as a cry for help, but because it felt like the only option left. If even All Might, the symbol of peace, looked him in the eye and told him he couldn't be a hero, what was left for him? What else could he be? But something had happened. A rush of heat, a strange pressure in his chest, and a patch of sky that had never looked so impossibly blue. Then the world had tilted and he'd fallen into something else entirely. When he woke, everything felt wrong. Or maybe right, depending on how you looked at it. He felt like he was boiling alive. His skin tingled. His blood thrummed. It had to be quirk exhaustion. He'd done the impossible. But what kind? He opened his eyes, heart pounding. His fingers were buried in thick, soft fur. Someone warm was cradling him. The air smelled faintly of ocean and rust and garbage, yet it felt not safe. Homier than his own apartment ever had. Whoever this was, they were holding him gently. Carefully. Tenderness radiated from their touch. He remembered the rooftop. He'd been alone. Only All Might knew he was up there, and that man had already turned his back. So this person, this gentle stranger, hadn't come to save him. He must have pulled them through. Somehow. A portal quirk? That was exciting but didn't quite feel right. It had been more like a window than a door, he remembered. And he hadn't thought doorway. He'd thought someone. Someone who wouldn't leave him. What if his quirk wasn't just a portal? What if it was something deeper? His mom's quirk let her pull small things toward her. His dad breathed fire. What if some bizarre combination of their abilities had created something more? A quirk that pulled what he wanted most? Needed most? That thought made his chest tighten. Because the person holding him now, the one who hadn't just left him there to die, they felt like someone who cared. When he imagined being left alone again, it hurt. Badly. So he did something he had never dared before. He let himself beg. Please don't leave me, Dad. I'm sorry I'm useless, please, I'll do anything, just don't go. There was a pause. He braced for disappointment. Instead, the man spoke with a voice like warm gravel, gentle but steady. You are safe, the figure said, brushing damp hair from his forehead. I won't leave my son. You're ill, that is all. Sleep now. Izuku almost broke character then. The kindness was too much. But he forced himself to nod and closed his eyes, though his mind raced. He had to know for sure. Once the man left the room, he pushed himself upright, dizzy but determined. He held out his hand like his mother did when she used her quirk and thought of the bowl of leftover katsudon in their fridge. A portal shimmered into existence. A second later, a warm bowl dropped into his lap. He stared at it, then grinned. This was real. He devoured it. Then, as a test, pushed it back through the portal. It vanished. Reached out again, back it came. And again. It worked every time. His quirk wasn't just strong. It was incredible. He could go back. Show off. Prove everyone wrong. Make them sorry. But Did he want to? Would his mom truly love him again, or just the quirk he came back with? His heart twisted. He didn't know. But he knew this. The person who had held him hadn't cared about a quirk. Had cared before he showed off any powers. And for once, someone had chosen him. He let the bowl drop back through the portal one last time and waved to close it, smiling as it vanished. Then he curled up, exhaustion overtaking him. When Splinter returned, the child was asleep again. Sunlight filtered through the camper's window, illuminating pale skin and dark, unruly hair. In the light, Splinter could see the scars more clearly. Old ones. Faint white tracks on the arms and shoulders. Some deliberate, some not. He felt rage, quiet and deep. This child had been harmed. Not once. Not by accident. Repeatedly. He'd seen these marks before. On a young girl named Angel. On street kids in the alleys. On soldiers of the foot who'd defected with haunted eyes. This child needed a parent. He sighed and gently touched the boy's forehead. The fever was breaking. That was good. Still he hesitated. Back home to his sons. His heart ached to think of them. Leonardo, who worried too much. Donatello, who would be searching already. Michelangelo, who would take it the hardest. Raphael would be furious. But they'd have found his letter by now. They would know. He meant to leave. Meant to return to Japan. To reflect. To rest. This had not been his plan. But his mind was still foggy. His old bones felt heavy. And however it had happened, he'd been brought here. To this boy. Was it fate? Perhaps. He had taught his sons to follow honor. And abandoning a hurt child? A lonely, frightened boy who had called him Dad and clung to him with all his heart? That would be dishonorable. Even if he died tomorrow, he knew his sons would understand. They would grieve. But they would understand. He knelt and gently shook the boy's shoulder. Wake up, little one. The boy stirred, eyes fluttering open. The boy smiled, voice soft but sure. I'm awake, Dad. Splinter blinked when there were no screams. Unexpected but welcome. He poured the medicine into a small cup. The boy took it without complaint. You'll stay with me, right, Dad? The pause. Of course, my son. The boy was still mildly feverish when he awoke to their growling stomach. That was something he'd forgotten. As a rat, even a human-sized one, he could survive on scraps and things that humans couldn't eat. When his sons were small, that had been a lifesaver. Table scraps, food thrown out by careless staff in homes for the elderly. He could make do. Sometimes he'd sneak into rooms of the senile or fading, slipping past awareness. Some called him a ghost. Others thought he was a grandchild. He pushed the memories away. Rising on aching bones, he checked the boy again. Still asleep, and that was both a relief and a concern. But Donatello's books had taught him rest was a healer's first medicine. Children slept when sick. That much, at least, was normal. He shouldn't be getting attached. He knew that. Time was short, and he had no guarantees in this strange place. But as he gently disentangled himself from the sleeping child, curled into him like he belonged there, he couldn't help thinking of his own sons, how he would have wanted someone to care for them if they'd fallen ill and were so alone with so many scars. Later. He'd think later. For now, the child needed food. The sun had risen. He didn't like that. Rats belong in the dark. Ninjas stayed in the shadows. Still he moved well. Quiet. Unobtrusive. The town was waking slowly as he approached the same block he'd scavenged before, the one with the pharmacy. His ears twitched. No people in sight, but the smell of freshly baked bread was unmistakable. A bakery. If he was lucky, there would be a bin out back filled with yesterday's unsold goods. He was just about to check when someone called out, "Hey, you." He froze, ears flicking toward the voice. A young adult, at least he thought so, with wild rainbow hair and two twisting ram's horns jutting from under the fringe. He blinked. A mutant? But no. Something was off. They didn't feel like a mutant, not like him, not like his sons. And yet, what? He said, confused. You look like you need a good meal. Again, just, what? His voice rasped. This had to be a trap. Mutant or not, humans were rarely kind to him. He'd been chased, spat on, hunted. Sit down. A muscled arm guided him toward a chair. Oddly gentle. No hostility. No threat. He let himself be led. The sense of baking bread and warmth wrapped around him. "Do you want something to drink, old-timer?" "If you have it," he replied, dazed. Old-timer? He supposed he was. He'd lost track of his age long ago. Rats didn't celebrate birthdays. A girl brought him a steaming cup and a sandwich. He tried not to stare, but her appearance caught him off guard. There were scales, pretty golden scales all along her face and reaching upwards to her bright blue hair, and gills fluttered along her neck like those of a koi. He ducked his head, embarrassed. And then ate. It was the best sandwich he'd had in, possibly decades. Warm, simple, perfect. The oolong tea soothed the lingering aches and weariness in his joints. When the cinnamon bun arrived fresh and still, steaming, he nearly wept. He didn't touch it. That would be for the child. "Thank you," he said finally. "But I cannot pay." "No problem, old-timer," the horned one said. "My dad built this place on the belief that everyone deserves a good meal. Even if it's just a sandwich." He nodded slowly, then rose. He was about to head for the bin anyway, to find something extra to take back. None of that," the horned one scolded. "You need something? Don't go dumpster diving like you're not worth the food." "My child. He is sick." "Sheet. That's this." The man handed him 2 loaves of bread wrapped in paper. "Come back if you need more." "No pride, all right? You're welcome here. Always." It was strange. So strange that he forgot to slink back into the shadows as he made his way toward the beach. The warmth in his chest warred with the dread coiling in his gut. And then he saw the police car. That wasn't what stopped him. It was the officer, a humanoid with a ginger cat's head. His partner was completely human and acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. He passed a shop window where televisions flickered behind glass. A commercial played, showing a muscled blonde man in tights. He blinked. It reminded him of Michelangelo's friend from the Justice Force. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He remembered that odd, disorienting tug, like the time he was pulled through the portals during the Ultimate Draco incident. And then he remembered that odd incident with the other turtles where he'd seen windows to other worlds. Other versions of his sons. He stopped. He wasn't in his Japan. He would never lie beside his master's remains. He would never see his sons again. By the time he reached the camper van, he was silent. Numb. He opened the door quietly, still gripping the bread and the untouched cinnamon bun. Inside, the child was awake, sitting up weakly, blanket clutched around his shoulders. Their eyes met. Splinter swallowed. Then asked softly, "Where in Japan are we, child?" The boy blinked. "Muzutafu." Splinter nodded slowly. That confirmed it. He let out a long, low sigh and sat down across from the child. "My name is Hamato Splinter," he said, almost absently. "I do not believe this is the Japan I knew." The boy hesitated. Izuku Midoriya. I think I brought you here." Splinter's gaze sharpened. "What?" "I didn't mean to. I didn't even know I had a quirk. I was alone, and I wish someone would help me, and something opened, like a crack in the air, and then you fell on me, and I swear, I didn't mean to." Splinter held up a paw. "Slow down. What is a quirk?" Izuku blinked. "You know, a power? Like your mutational quirk? Super strength, fire breath, telekinesis, everyone's got one." Splinter tilted his head. "Mutation, yes. I have never heard of a quirk." "So, there aren't others like you?" "Only my sons." Izuku flinched. His face flickered between awed intrigue and horror. "You have family." Izuku looked down. "I didn't mean to take you from them. I swear. I didn't mean to take someone's dad." Splinter was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across and gently placed the cinnamon bun in Izuku's hands. "I may be a little upset," he said softly. "I may never see them again. That is a pain I would not wish on anyone." Izuku looked close to tears. "But I'm here now, and you are a child in need." Izuku looked up. Hope flickered in his green eyes. I will not abandon a child who needs care, Splinter said, voice firm. Izuku threw his arms around him. Splinter let him. Later that night, when the trailer had gone quiet, only the rhythmic breathing of sleep and the distant lull of the ocean waves filling the silence, Izuku finally had the time to think. He'd already known his quirk was strong. He'd been experimenting with it earlier, after all. But back then, he'd assumed its range was small, maybe enough to grab someone displaced within Japan. A local trick. Something containable, but this? This was something else entirely. He'd reached through space, not just geographic space, but dimensional space. He hadn't just summoned someone. He'd summoned exactly who he needed, from a version of reality that wasn't their own. It was mind-blowing. The multiverse theory was real, and somehow his quirk could manipulate it. That meant his quirk wasn't just powerful. It was intelligent. It hadn't grabbed just anyone, it had reached out and brought him Splinter. The very person who fit the aching want inside his chest like a key turning in a lock. And okay, yes, he felt a little guilty at first. Because logically, someone somewhere was probably missing Splinter right now. Maybe there were kids like him alone, broken, who had just lost the one person keeping them together. But that guilt didn't last long. Because why should he feel guilty? Splinter had been in terrible shape when he arrived. His robes were threadbare, his fur matted, his eyes exhausted. Whatever home he'd come from, they clearly hadn't been giving Splinter the care he deserved. Maybe those kids had lost a father, but if they really loved him, why hadn't they protected him better? Why hadn't they made sure he was cared for, safe, cherished? Izuku's quirk had reached into the multiverse and given him what he needed. Maybe what Splinter needed too. And really, wasn't that just how quirks worked? They weren't random. They had limits, sure, but also personality. Tendencies. Bonds. He'd always thought that Bakugo's aggression wasn't just nurture, it was nature. Nitroglycerin sweat, a volatile explosive used in treating heart conditions? A quirk that literally created pressure? Of course it would come with a hair-trigger temper and inflated ego, especially with the way everyone had told Kaken from day one that he was born for heroics. And no one had ever stopped Bakugo. No one ever said, maybe we should check if that explosion-prone child is emotionally stable. No, Bakugo was the golden boy. So why should he, Izuku, feel bad when his quirk did something extraordinary? If anything, maybe this meant he finally understood his drawback. There was that strange, proprietary pull he felt when he looked at Splinter. That instinctive thought of mine, long before he'd processed what his quirk had even done. That possessiveness wasn't normal. It had to be the price of power. Maybe his quirk didn't just respond to logic or want, it responded to emotion, to attachment. It was reactive. A dragon guarding treasure. It wouldn't give him a pile of money. Unless he could picture why he needed it. He couldn't just will himself rich, it wouldn't work like that. No, the quirk wanted meaning, purpose, desire. It fed on what mattered to him. And in return, it gave him what he needed. Money? That would just feed the dragon's hoard instinct. He'd hoard it, cling to it, lose sight of himself. No, he'd earn it honestly. Build something instead. He had skills. Computers, analysis, quirks. Counseling maybe. He could probably make decent money online, especially if he created a new identity. Something separate from the boy the world had discarded. Which brought him to the next point, his identity. He grimaced, thinking of school. He was so far ahead, thanks to boredom and years of being underestimated, that he could probably test out of middle school entirely. And the school hated him. If he framed it right, said his father had returned and wanted him out of the public eye, they'd probably fall over themselves to push him out the door. As for his mother, well, she'd been fading out of his life for a while. She wouldn't file a missing child report. But Mitsuki might. She was tenacious. Still, guardianship papers weren't hard to get. He'd looked into it. It wouldn't take much to legally vanish. And really, wouldn't it be poetic? Kaken had always told him to disappear. To stop pretending. So maybe he would. Maybe Midoriya Izuku would cease to exist. Maybe Deku would die too. And in their place, a new boy would rise. One with purpose. One with power. One with a father who chose him, not one who left. Hamato Izuku. A Quirk wielder with portals and a future no one could predict. He liked the sound of that. There is a familiar scent in the air. It's his scent, and it's making his fur stand on end because cannot be here. They had dealt with him. He had been erased from existence due to his own hubris. And yet, the scent doesn't lie. I see you, freak. That voice sends shivers down his spine. You'll never be rid of me. But where are the other scents of his sons? Where are they? Why can't he smell them? Why can't he see them? Why can't he sense their presence anywhere close? And then he looks down. All 5 of his sons in a twisted pile of limbs beneath his paws. What? Didn't he only have 4? He shakes his head in denial. They can't be dead. They can't be. They faced this monster together so long ago, and had finally ended the cycle of violence. They'd had peace, hadn't they? His mind is foggy, and he can't quite remember. All that matters is the grief, a familiar friend from when he'd been unable to stop Hun from striking down his master. The grief mixes with an anger that he'd always shoved deep, deep down with meditation. Anger that fed on the feelings of being oh so useless as he clung to that windowsill, trying so desperately to do something, anything, so that he wouldn't have to watch this again. Anger that fed on the uselessness he felt when his sons asked why they couldn't be part of the world above. Anger that fed on the fear that this was where he was always destined to be, useless and grieving as his sons bled out because he wasn't good enough, strong enough. He'd feared his rage. It made him forget his strength, the supernatural force that came with his mutation. It was why he never used his claws or teeth, never let himself fall into the animal. Ninjutsu had always been enough. But now, he wanted to rip the man before him apart, tear him limb from limb. Something shook him. Someone. A voice, soft and pleading, reached through the fury. Father, wake up. His claws were embedded in something cold. Metal. He blinked, breath catching. The bodies vanished. The monster was gone. Only the camper van's floor remained beneath his claws. Shame burned through him. A nightmare. He hadn't had one this vivid in years, and even then he hadn't lost control like that. Slowly, painfully, he retracted his claws and inhaled deeply. Focus. Control. The images still clung to him like cobwebs, but his heart began to slow. He had to stay grounded. He had to. Because if he ever lost this grip on himself again, he might hurt the one person he had left. He had to figure out what to do next because the little one needed him. I am sorry, my son. I did not mean to scare you. Now, we need to talk about your mother and your school. Izuku flinched. Do we have to? I did that once with my sons, in illegal life. Not because we wanted to, but because the humans would never have accepted us. Here it seems that problem does not exist. No one is hunting you or me down just for your existence. You have the opportunity to do what I always wished for my sons, to have a normal life. No one knows I'm here though. And would you be truly happy? Maybe for a short time, you would be. And maybe it is selfish of me to push this upon you, but I'm not young. I will not live forever, and you need skills, education for when that day comes. I promise to care for you, and I cannot and will not do so illegally, not when there is no need to. Izuku deflates, and he feels terrible for making his son feel this way, but while the trailer is an excellent place for a rat, it isn't good for a growing human. He knows this. He knows that with his mind going fuzzy and his body aching, that time is a luxury he doesn't have. He had known that even before he'd fallen through that portal. He just hopes he'll have enough time to ensure this son has a better life before his mind goes completely. Walking down a sidewalk in the daytime with his son makes his fur crawl, even if he has seen that no one gives him more than a concerned glance as he does so. It makes him feel a bit of anger, not at Izuku for dragging him here, but that it didn't happen sooner. How much better could his sons' lives have been in a world that didn't hate them for what they were? How much could his sons have accomplished if they had been dragged here when his sons were small? He pushes the thought away. It does no one any good to dwell on what could have been. Izuku is guiding with slow steps, and he hates that he has to make him do this. He hates that it is necessary, and yet none of what he'd said was wrong. He'd have killed for the opportunity for his sons to be legal, for them to live normal lives without fear, and truthfully when he thinks about it, he did have that opportunity. He could have taken his sons to the battle nexus after his victory there, as the daimyo had told him was his right as champion and friend. He could have told his sons about Orokusaki and the Foot clan before they'd ever been an issue, so that Leonardo wouldn't have stumbled across them and thought that they were legitimate in their claims of sanctuary. Could have, should have, would have. His life was full of them. But now, he's been given an opportunity for a second chance. Granted, it will be without the other sons he loves so very much, but there isn't anything he can do about that. He could ask Izuku to bring his other sons here, so they can all be a family, but then he remembers how sickly it had made Izuku after they had first met, and he shakes that idea off. He is here, his sons are in another world, there is nothing that will change that. He had promised to care for Izuku, and he would do so. He would do so with the knowledge gained of everything he'd done wrong with his other sons. A part of him hopes that Izuzu's mother does care for him, is willing to help out with this because he is old, and his time is short. Another part of him remembers those scars, and knows that any parent who truly cared would have taken one look at those and done everything in their power to make sure there weren't any more scars. That those that gave the scars would not get away with harming their child. The woman opening the door takes one look at them, and sneers as if something rotten is under her nose. "Oh, it's you. I didn't think I'd see you again, and who is this?" He doesn't bother answering. How can a parent look at their child with such contempt? "Izuku, get what you want from your room while I talk to your mother." He waits until Izuku is behind a closed door to turn to this woman. He won't give her the pleasure of the name mother, she doesn't deserve that. "Well, whoever you are, he's your problem now." She gets up, grabs some paperwork from a drawer and places it in front of him on the table. "You'll excuse me, I don't read kanji." "What are these?" "Emancipation papers." "Just sign here." "You don't even know me, and yet you'd sign papers to be rid of him?" A growl escapes his throat, unbiting. He sees her shrink in fear, and he barely catches the anger this time. "You don't understand. I know I'm a terrible mother, you don't think I know that? But I can't stand it. He's quirkless, he destroys everything he touches. My husband left because of him. My friends won't talk to me because of him. This apartment costs more than I can afford because of him. So yeah, I signed the paperwork ages ago." He barely keeps the rage down as he signs the paperwork and turns to his son, who is standing there with a duffel bag and a backpack, just starting down at his shoes. "Come." He grabs his son's hand, trying to comfort him as Izuku's shoulders shake. His son is crying and it's all that woman's fault. "Is your school any better?" he asks as they come back down the stairs, and then, seeing the hesitation, he sighs, "Of course not. My sons can never catch a break no matter what world they come from, can they?" Izuku doesn't seem to know what to say to that. One of the first things Nedzu had done after looking for any reports from that virus he'd planted into the scientists' computers to tell him if anybody had gone back to that lab, they hadn't, he'd triple-checked, was to reach out to his contacts. There were heroes he'd paired with while he'd been fighting the HPSC for his right to be a hero as an animal with a quirk. Fat Gum had been one of the ones that worked best with him because the man had a viewpoint of everyone deserves kindness that had bewildered him at first. Fat Gum also happened to help a man named Hashiyama Yudo open a mutation Quirk-run bakery. A bakery that had reported back about the alert he'd put out about his suspected predecessor. His mind made the connections easily when he looked back at the still shot of his suspected predecessor on the screen. They were old, judging from the gray fur, and they were most likely homeless, judging from the threadbare yukata they wore. His suspected predecessor must have been homeless for quite some time, based on the report of how bewildered Hashiyama had said they'd been by basic kindness. That part he didn't want to think too hard about. Because when he thought too hard about it, he remembered, and when he remembered, that place became his cell once again, even now that he was free. He wondered, did this suspected predecessor feel that way too? And what was he going to do about it? He could easily track down this older version, bring them to his school, his nest, where they'd be safe, just like he was safe now. But this older one definitely would not like that any more than he would have when he had first escaped, and based on the way he had moved like his own pup did, like a shadow given form, if he pressed, they would vanish. He knew that. And yet, he cannot help the part of him that craves to bring them in so that they can be safe, cared for. Because, as much as he is a hero, he is an animal first, and he misses the company that he didn't get to keep. He misses the feeling of warm bodies curled against his own, and his own pup, while a good substitute for the connection he misses, doesn't like physical affection. Not that he likes it much either anymore. That's what hurts so much about it. That pull of animal want and the refusal to fall into it, because if he gave in to those cravings, the world would never see animals with quirks as anything more than animals. He supposed for now, he would keep in mind that this suspected predecessor had to have his nest close to where both the pharmacy he'd broken into and the bakery was, because food and medicine had been his first priority too when he'd escaped. Though he didn't like to think about how long this suspected predecessor must have been on the run for them to have never met before now with all of the alerts he'd kept up about any animals with quirks. For now, he'd keep a close eye on their suspected nest, and hopefully, soon he could go looking. Because he didn't want to leave them alone for too long, to lose them when he'd just found them. Whoever Splinter's children were, they really failed him by letting things get so bad. He barely remembers his own father, but he's certain that man never had to use sleight of hand, or paw, to quietly swap a half-eaten piece of bread for a full one. He wonders how many times Splinter had to do that, how often he put his own well-being aside for children who never seem to notice. The care Splinter shows is remarkable too. He never pushes him away when he ends up curled up on the floor instead of the bed. Instead, he just finds Splinter's tail wrapped protectively around him and marvels that someone cares enough to protect him, not put him down. It's strange, feeling both cared for and caring for someone again. But it's also dangerous. He's only had a real dad for a week, and already he can't imagine what he'd do without him. He tires easily, between learning to move silently, the first lesson of ninjutsu, according to his dad, and practicing with his portals. But he has to figure this out. There's only a short time before UA's entrance exam, yet that doesn't seem as important as it once did. He still wants to be a hero more than anything, especially now that he has a quirk to back it up instead of just hopeless dreams. And yet, this protecting Splinter feels more important. Part of it, he's sure, is because his quirk's drawback is the need to keep what he deems his. But it's also because it isn't fair. He finally has everything he could have asked for, and it still isn't enough. He isn't naive. He knows what gray hair means in people, and gray fur means Splinter is very old and, from what he's seen, starting to lose control. It was impressive to see his mother terrified by Splinter's deep, possessive growl, but it was also frightening to see Splinter's face twist with shame and confusion. Then there was the nightmare he hadn't thought about what those claws could do, and that same shame and confusion appeared again. It made him angry. So he practiced. Mornings are devoted to quirk practice. First, he tests his portal's range for both summoning and sending things through. He finds a small metal recycling plant not far from the beach, opens a portal, and brings through one of the cats that patrols the area. Then he pushes the cat back through. So far, the only issue with distance is that when he tries to reach too far, like summoning food from his favorite restaurant in Hosu, he only gets a tiny window the size of his pinky and a massive headache. He hopes that with practice, he'll improve. He suspects summoning Splinter was powered by desperation and his quirk finally awakening after being dormant for so long. He needs his quirk to do it again. He's not foolish. If Splinter is already showing signs of a fracturing mind, almost like a mix of Alzheimer's and someone on trigger, then their time together might be shorter than he'd hoped. He'll just have to keep practicing. He refuses to believe his quirk is so limited. He refuses to be the reason he loses another parent. Someone is rummaging in the piles of scrap metal just outside their little home. He sensed their presence for at least 3 days and kept Izuku close to the van just in case. Sure, the humans here don't look at him with fear like they did in his world, and the man at the bakery was kind. But that doesn't stop years of instinct from kicking in. He can't forget what happened when he wasn't on guard, or when humans discovered his last nest. The little one is only just starting to learn, hasn't mastered being silent or knowing when to vanish or fight back. If their nest is discovered again, he isn't sure he has the energy to fight like he used to. His joints ache, his leg burns. Still, if he takes out the threat before it finds his littlest, there won't be a constant returning danger like there was for his other sons. Stay inside, he growls at Izuku, shoving the door closed. The presence outside doesn't feel as threatening as Orakusaki or the other dangers that invaded his last nest. But that doesn't mean anything. This is a different world, and who knows if threats feel the same here. He doesn't. As he slips around a pile of appliances, he smells motor oil, a familiar scent. Then he hears the clank of metal on metal. Who throws out a perfectly good motherboard? Donatello. He knows it can't be his smartest son. And yet, how many times has he come home to parts strewn around the garage, nearly tripped over half-finished projects, or heard the same complaints about perfectly good parts being thrown away? Could Donatello have been brought here too? Izuku said he didn't know he had a power and hadn't meant to bring him to this world. Hope flickers. If Donatello is here, he could help with the little one. But then he sees who's making the noise. Oh, hello there. He can't help the growl that rises in his throat. How dare this human make him think it was his son? How dare they come to his safe nest and threaten his sanctuary? Hated, it's okay, I'm sorry to have disturbed you. I'm leaving. It's a kid, he realizes as they raise their arms. Just a kid, and he'd been ready to attack as if they were Orakusaki. Of course, it's not just this kid he's scared. Izuku is just like his other sons. Izuku is behind him, ready to step between him and the strange kid he just frightened. Another world, another chance to do everything right, and yet his mind betrays him. He steps back, trying to show he won't hurt the pink-haired child. Hey, I'm Izuku, and this is Splinter. I'm Mei Hatsume, future CEO of Hatsume Industries. Do you two live here? That's so cool. I wish my moms would let me live in a junkyard, then I'd never run out of material for my babies. Babies? See, I could easily replace that walking stick of yours with my automatic height and terrain-adjusting mobility aid. He glances at Izuku. Are all the humans in this world so odd? Even April O'Neil took time to get used to them. She didn't go straight from mutants are real to I want to help you so quickly. He supposes he'll have to get used to it. Apologies. I'm not used to visitors. There's a buzz, and Mei pulls out a cell phone. I'm at Dagoba Beach, Mom. Yeah, I'm fine. Did you know people live here? Yeah, they do look like they could use a good meal. Yeah, I'll invite them. That was my mom. She's inviting you both over for supper. Why does he get the feeling this isn't so much an invitation as a you're coming whether you like it or not? Still, they're running low on bread, and as nice as the bakery owner is, bread won't keep Izuku going for long. The decision is easy. Lead the way. Mei doesn't have the best grasp of what's socially acceptable. She knows she's smarter than most kids in her class and is determined to be the best support hero she can be. That's why she goes dumpster diving for the best pieces to make her inventions, and the best place for materials is Dagoba Beach. She's never been afraid on her scavenging missions until she hears a deep, rumbling growl and sees someone with a rat mutation quirk. For a moment, all she can think of is how she's only known one person with a mutation quirk, and they just had bunny ears. Even then, there were days their ears twitched and they seemed scared of everything. Looking again, she sees what she missed while searching for parts. He has very gray fur, and his yukata has seen better days. She may not be a hero, and may never want to be, but she knows when someone needs help. Then she notices the green-haired kid who snuck up, and she quickly texts her mom to call her. Soon, they're all sitting around the table at her house, and if nothing else, she's found a new project, helping Izuku boost his quirk to help his dad. Toshinori had been feeling guilty ever since he walked away from that boy. It wasn't just the memory of the crushed look on Midoriya's face or the way the kid had curled in on himself like someone expecting a blow. It was the whisper afterward. A quiet word that hit like a punch. Hypocrite. It sounded like her. Like Nana. He had told Izuku he couldn't be a hero without a quirk, something Nana never told him, even when he was 100 pounds of scrawny, idealistic nothing. She had believed in him. So why hadn't he believed in that boy? And then there were the other voices. The ones that had started whispering after all for one shattered his body and left him bleeding out in Kamino. A chorus, rising from the dark corner of his mind he didn't dare acknowledge. It's time. You're not All Might anymore. Pass it on. He'd always ignored them. Because if he wasn't All Might, what was he? Just Toshinori Yagi, a weak man with scars where his power used to be. But now the voices were different. The boy is the one we want. The boy is the only one we will accept. He wasn't searching for that kid because of ghost voices. That would be insane. No, he was just concerned. Concerned enough to ask Neo Mesa to pull up a file. Just a routine check. Just to make sure Izuku Midoriya was okay. He wasn't abusing his position. He wasn't stalking a child. He just needed to know that he hadn't broken something fragile, something hopeful. Right? Frustration. Burning, teeth gritting, desk punching frustration. He'd managed to summon a skateboard. A chair. A busted stop sign. But none of it came close to the sheer, bone-deep power he'd felt the day he'd summoned Splinter. That day had felt like being cracked open and filled with light. Since then? Just static. He trained constantly. Meditated. Visualized. Mei even ran brain scans on him while he tried to replicate the exact mental state from that day. But nothing. Maybe it was because, back then, he'd thought he was going to die. He'd reached into the void with his heart wide open, screaming, "I want someone, anyone to save me." He didn't want to have to be ready to die again. Was that what his quirk needed? A brush with death? A breaking point? He couldn't believe that. He wouldn't. What if his quirk really was sentient? That wasn't unheard of. Some quirks had a will of their own, maybe his was like that. Maybe, instead of commanding it, he should ask it. He sat cross-legged, breathing in the "Thank you," he whispered into the space between thoughts. "For helping me that day. For bringing him to me." He thought about his dad, about Splinter. About the weariness in his movements. The pain he tried to hide. The way his voice sometimes cracked when no one was supposed to hear. "Please," Izuku thought. "Help me help him. Give me something that can ease his pain. Buy us more time. Let him stay just a little longer." A shimmer. A ripple in the air like heat waves on pavement. A portal, smaller than the one from before, opened in front of him. He didn't think. He reached in. And something reached back. A hand. Cold. Fragile. And then thump, a girl tumbled forward, wide-eyed and trembling, and for a moment all Izuku could think was, "What the hell?" She scrambled away from him, terrified. And then she collapsed. There was a flare of light. So bright it swallowed the room whole. When it faded, Izuku blinked, spots from his eyes. Splinter's fur brown. Not gray. He was breathing easier. Izuku stared. That had worked. But it had taken everything he had. Running was a bad idea. She knew that. Last time, she'd run and the only person who'd ever been kind to her turned into red sludge in front of her eyes. But the guard was drunk. The others were asleep. She moved silently. Past the room that made her skin crawl. Past the cages and labs. Her bare feet barely made a sound. She knew it was wrong. She knew she'd be punished. And yet, fresh air. It hit her like lightning. Cool, crisp, free. She ran. Fast and wild and breathless, even as her heart screamed that it would end badly. And then blue light. A window in the air. And an arm reaching through. That was ridiculous. Impossible. But she thought. Anywhere. Anywhere but here. So she grabbed it. She hit something soft, a mattress? The boy Sodom in front of her looked kind-eyed. That didn't mean anything. Nice faces lied. Her quirk flared, and for a second she thought, "Oh no. I've killed again." Nothing. There was a warm weight pressed against his side. No two warm weights. And the sharp tang of old blood. Blood? Did Izuku get hurt? Did I hurt him? The thought clawed its way into his mind with a cold, ugly hook. It never would have occurred to him before. He would never hurt one of his sons. He would rather die. But ever since his return from the digital void of the internet, his thoughts had been fuzzy, blurred around the edges, slippery, and that fuzziness had only worsened after he'd been pulled into Izuku's world. It was part of the reason he'd started teaching the boy as he once had taught his sons. Not only to give Izuku structure and strength, but to give himself something familiar. Something to anchor him. To hold back the fog. But now, his mind was clear. Painfully, sharply clear. And he could see the gouges in the floor. Deep, angry claw marks were barely hidden beneath Izuku's feet. He stared at them. I did that. He had always known how sharp his claws were, even before the mutation. Hun had learned the hard way the scar over the man's eye had been Splinter's doing, back in the early days of desperation and fury. And now, here? He remembered the snarl that had ripped from his throat when that woman had dared call herself Izuku's mother, how she had cowered. He remembered being a threat. His heart clenched. He turned his gaze downward. Izuku was pushed out farther than usual, no longer curled tightly to his side like he preferred. It had always concerned Splinter a little how touch-starved the boy clearly was, but it also reminded him of his own sons, who once piled around him like puppies before the world hardened them. But now, Izuku's arm was stretched out, cradling something smaller. Something fragile. A child. A little girl. She lay against Splinter's chest, her tiny body trembling even in sleep. Bandages wrapped her thin arms, and that was where the scent of blood came from. Her hair was silver white and wild, and a single horn curved gently from her forehead. He checked her bandages. No fresh blood. Just the ghost of pain. The smell was old. Still, he felt a wave of relief wash through him. He hadn't hurt her. Thank God he hadn't hurt her. But if not him, then who? How had she come to them? And then he remembered Izuku's story, how his quirk had brought him here, to this world. A quirk he still didn't fully understand, not even now. This girl, Izuku must have brought her too. Why was irrelevant? She was hurt. And she was here. And Splinter knew, as surely as he had ever known anything, that he couldn't let her go back to whoever or whatever had done this. He had felt this way before. When April first collapsed into their lives, bleeding and terrified. He'd welcomed her without hesitation. And now? Now he had 2 children. 2 wounded souls pressed to his side. 2 fragile lives depending on him. He couldn't do this alone, not completely. But he didn't have to, did he? This world had been kinder than he ever expected. Mei's mothers had offered help, he remembered that much. They had opened their doors, their hearts. They'd said, come back anytime. And now he would. He would swallow his pride. Because pride was a luxury, and these children needed stability. A safe home. They deserved better. They would have better. He gently shook Izuku awake. The boy stirred immediately, blinking up at him with sleepy confusion that quickly cleared when he saw the girl beside them. Splinter gathered the girl in his arms. She barely stirred. His legs still ached, but it was a manageable pain, an echo of the old injury, not the throbbing torment that had plagued him for years. Something was different. Something better. Her quirk, he suspected. She had rewound time for him. Just a little. That, too, would be a problem eventually. A girl who could reverse time would be hunted, exploited. He could already feel the storm coming. He would need help. Legal help. Documents. Identities. He would ask Mei's mothers. Not just for advice, but for something more, a chance to make this real. If they were willing, he would make these children his. Not just in action or intention, but in law. His family. Because he could not bring back his sons. They were grown, out there somewhere, walking their own paths. He missed them with a pain he could not voice, but they did not need him now. These 2 did. And now that his mind was clear again, now that the fog had lifted, he would not fail them. Nedzu had devoted most of his recent days to tracking down his suspected predecessor, retracing steps he himself had once taken after escaping the lab. The pattern was unmistakable, a break-in at a pharmacy, but not for the expected painkillers or antibiotics. The items stolen were pediatric children's cough syrup, children's Advil. Someone was caring for a child. Then came the bakery where they'd asked for enough bread and pastries for 2, not 1. Again, the evidence pointed to a child. Nedzu's suspicions solidified. Whoever this was, they weren't alone. They were protecting a pup, much as he had once longed for someone to protect him. Now, Nedzu waited for the next logical step, identification. If his predecessor was following the same path, soon they would need papers for themselves and their young charge. After all, every child needed to go to school, and that meant registration. He hated waiting. Every hour that passed was another chance for his quarry to vanish. But he doubted they would. If their pup needed schooling, they would have to surface perhaps even at his own UA high. Wishful thinking perhaps, but Nedzu allowed himself a moment of hope. Hacking into the Quirk registry and school enrollment databases was trivial for him. He'd done it before, usually to ensure the safety of children who might be slipping through the cracks. Any school that allowed a child to suffer didn't deserve to exist, in his view. Every kid deserved a childhood better than his own. His vigilance paid off. A ping from the Quirk registry. Hamato Splinter, recently registered, with a mutational quirk matching his predecessor's description. Another ping from the school system. Hamato Izuku, formerly Midoriya Izuku, now registered for the UA entrance exam and no longer listed as quirkless. His quirk, Portal Pull. Further digging revealed, Hamato Splinter, registered as the brother-in-law of Hatsume's mother, an ingenious cover. The Hatsume's eccentricity was legendary. No one would question a long-lost relative suddenly appearing. Nedzu smiled. Clever, but not quite clever enough. He made a note to arrange a meeting with Hamato Izuku. If the child was anything like his guardian, things were about to get interesting. UA High, the school he'd dreamed about since he understood the word hero. For a moment he heard those words again, useless Deku, be realistic, and worst of all, he ruined everything. But that wasn't him anymore. He had a quirk, a powerful quirk, and he had training. Move it, Deku! The growl from behind him might have scared him once. But he wasn't scared of Katsuki, not anymore. He glared at Katsuki. F off, Katsuki, you know that's not my name. And then he smiled, because the resulting shock of Deku not cowering in front of Katsuki had caused the blonde to almost blue screen. His face stuck in between his normal scowl and confusion. It felt better than he had thought it would to leave Katsuki there, just staring after him. Was it petty? Probably. Did he care? He'd already had his revelation about his and Katsuki's friendship. If the other boy wanted to start something, then Izuku would finish it. He wasn't going to let Katsuki ruin this for him, and that included letting the other boy call him by that hated name. The written test had been rather easy, even considering the fact that he hadn't technically finished middle school. If it came to it, he'd tell them the same thing he'd told the administration when he'd gone back after they had made their new home with Mei. You don't want me here any more than my father wants me here. Let me test out so neither of us has to see each other again. He was glad he had asked to test out rather than attend online school. Because while online school would have been nice, they didn't allow people to just join in at what would be the end of the year. It did mean that he missed a few questions, as some things he was certain they'd never covered except in class. But he thinks he's done well enough to pass. And now it's just the physical. He, unfortunately, has to sit next to Katsuki, who glares at him, and he shows a finger back, which startles Katsuki again. If he'd known years ago all he had to do to shut Katsuki up was to swear back and to push back, he would have done so. Welcome UA examinees. Can I get HY? Present mix voice echoes, and Izuku, although nervous, gives him a hesitant "Hey," which makes all of the kids in the auditorium stare at him, and yet present mix ear-to-ear grin makes him feel glad that he'd responded back. Hey, nice to hear someone's enthusiastic. Here's how the exam is going to go. He almost tunes out present mix explanation. He's half listening, but he'd already read the pamphlet front to back, noticing with amusement the hidden off buttons that are pointed out with very small print. Almost like someone wanted the smart people or the desperate people to have some chance. He tunes back in when a blue-haired kid with glasses makes a fuss about there not being any information on the zero-pointer before present Mike can even talk about it. He almost rolls his eyes when present Mike explains the last robot. Present Mike may say that the best thing to do is to avoid the bot, but he has a feeling there is a secondary reason for this robot. He doesn't know what that reason is yet, but he thinks there has to be a reason. He's grateful that he and Katsuki are assigned different testing sites. While it might be fun to show Katsuki exactly what he'd been working on all these months, he'd rather not have to do so while dodging explosions. He's a little nervous as the bus finally pulls up to the exam site. This is it, this is his chance. And then he exhales, remembering that no matter what, his father will be proud of him. No matter what, he will find a way to be a hero. When the doors open, he doesn't hesitate, merely picturing what he wants in his mind, and then grinning when a katana with the guard wrapped in blue dropped into his hand. From there, it is a simple thing to stab the katana into the off button and rush to the next robot. Occasionally, he has to stop to push another examinee out of the way when they overestimate their limits and take on too many robots, or when they stand there staring like that one purple-haired kid. He debated giving the purple-haired kid his katana, and yet, it was his katana. He didn't like that idea, and as much as he wanted to help that purple-haired kid more than just rescuing them from being overwhelmed, this was a test. Time seemed to lose all meaning as he went from robot to robot, losing track after his estimated total of 40 points. He didn't know if that would be enough, but even with more physical training, he still was feeling tired and headachy. And then, just as he thinks there aren't any robots left, and he thinks he's up to 50 points, the ground begins to rumble. The 0-pointer appears, and he can't help thinking, holy shit, that's the 0-pointer? No wonder they said to avoid it. And he would have if he hadn't heard someone cry out. A girl was trapped under some rubble. Hey, are you okay? Then he almost smacked himself. Of course, she wasn't okay. I'd erred that I used my quirk too much. Going to be sick. Well, he could fix that. The rubble is small. I know you're feeling ill. Can you use your quirk on your foot once I lift the rubble? She nodded, and he put his katana against the rubble, prying it upwards just enough for her to touch her foot, and then pull it out. He grabbed her, and though it wasn't comfortable, legged it as fast as he could towards the narrow space between the fake buildings. Time's up. He had never been so glad to hear those words. Even as the girl hurled all over him. Sorry, she said, looking green. A great way to thank you, barfing all over you like that. No problem, he smiled. It's good practice for when civilians will do it too. He thinks he can leave the exam happy. Even if the whole time he felt like he was being watched, he had saved a life. And it was a cute girl. From the observation deck, Toshinori Yagi sat frozen. There he was. The boy. The boy he'd left on the rooftop. The one the vestiges screamed for. The one he'd thought hoped might carry one for all. And now, this boy had a quirk. Toshinori watched as Izuku summoned a katana from thin air, wielded it like second nature. No surprise in his posture. No hesitation. That wasn't borrowed power. That was his. There was only one way someone that age could develop a quirk so suddenly. All for one. His stomach churned. Could it be? Was Izuku a plant? A pawn placed by that monster, waiting to strike? But then, Toshinori saw the boy stop to help others. Saw him risk his own life to save a stranger. Saw him smile even while covered in vomit. No, that wasn't a villain. That was a hero. And yet, he couldn't shake the fear. What if this child, one who once begged to be a hero, had been twisted into a trap? What if he was both? He had to know. He had to be sure. Because if Izuku truly wanted to be a hero, if he were still that boy from the rooftop, then Toshinori would do whatever it took to save him. Even if it meant risking everything. If there was ever a time he regretted accepting his father-in-law but blood's offer to teach at the school where he'd learned to be a hero, it was during the entrance exams. Every year, he had to watch overpowered, flashy, overconfident kids tear through the robots, acting as if showing off their destructive abilities was the pinnacle of heroism. Given the current state of heroics, he supposed they weren't entirely wrong. The top 10 heroes all had showy quirks. The only exception was Gang Orca, and even he ended up on the heroes who look villainous list. There just weren't enough heroes in the spotlight who did the dirty work. He'd known that even as a fresh-faced general studies kid, hoping to prove that a villainous quirk didn't make him a villain. But this year was different. 3 examinees had caught his eye for doing things differently. Hagakure Toru, using her invisibility to stealthily take out robots. Koda Koji, commanding birds to attack the robots' eyes, and Hitoshi Shinso, whose application described a quirk that intrigued him, though he worried when the boy had frozen during the exam. Most of all, he had a very specific problem child to worry about. Being called to the principal's office so early in the year was unusual, and the tension in his "not dad's" posture told him it was serious. I want you to go easy on an applicant if he makes it into your classroom. What? You've never had a problem with my teaching style before. Why change now? He let some irritation show maybe some kid with a powerful parent had threatened Nedzu. It wouldn't be the first time. It's about that person you encountered on patrol. The one with the mutational quirk or what appeared to be one. As an animal with a quirk, I've often felt alone, the only one of my kind. When I saw them, I knew they couldn't be just another person with a mutational quirk. They're registered as the guardian of one Hamato Izuku. That made much more sense than blackmail. He almost rolled his eyes at the confirmation of what he'd always suspected. Nedzu had probably put a tracker or camera in his hero costume. He'd always known Nedzu didn't think like a human, and honestly, he didn't mind the surveillance as much as he thought he would. For Nedzu, it was about keeping those he cared for safe. He could understand that. And now, he understood why Nedzu was asking this favor. If there really was someone else out there like Nedzu, he couldn't blame him for wanting to reach out. Fine, he'd go easy on Hamato Izuku for Nedzu's sake. But it didn't bode well when, upon entering the classroom, he had to use his quirk to stop a blonde kid from blowing up the wall behind Hamato. "What do you two think you're doing?" he growled. "Personal beefs aren't tolerated at UA." Hamato looked at him, then at the blonde, and scowled. "Tell that to Bakugo." He threw the first punch, since I have multiple witnesses. I was only defending myself. If that's a problem, maybe I don't belong here not because of him, but because a hero should stand up for what's right, including themselves. He raised an eyebrow. "Well said. Bakugo Katsuki, right?" He already knew the answer. He didn't always read the full files, but he remembered Bakugo from the entrance exam. Excellent control of a flashy quirk, but no regard for others' safety. Looking at Hamato's arms, he noticed old scars starburst-shaped, like explosions. Both boys came from the same middle school. He didn't like the conclusion he was drawing. For some reason, Bakugo had been allowed to use his quirk on others freely. He was tempted to expel him on the spot. They didn't need another endeavor. But Izuku seemed to have it handled. If he managed this right, both could become better heroes. "Bakugo, you may have been the biggest fish in a small pond, but here, your actions matter. If you use your quirk on someone just because you dislike them, you can leave. I won't train another endeavor." Bakugo paled. Deku deserved it, lying to me all this time. "What did you do to CK up to get here?" "I passed the entrance exam just like you, Bakugo. And that's not my name. My name is Hamato Izuku, not Deku. It never was, and it never will be again. You may have pushed me around in middle school, but this is hero school. Like Sensei said, we're here to be heroes. Don't like it? There's the door." Bakugo hesitated, then sneered, "Whatever, Deku. Like a null freak, like you will do anything but waste time." "Bakugo!" Aizawa roared. "To the principal's office. The rest of you stay here." He dragged Bakugo off, anticipating a fight, but Bakugo didn't resist. Maybe it was only now hitting him that there would be consequences he should have faced the moment he used his quirk on another student. He wasn't gentle as he dropped Bakugo into the principal's most uncomfortable chair. "Ah, Bakugo Katsuki, was it?" the principal asked, already knowing. "Give me one good reason I shouldn't expel you." "You can't." Bakugo's palms sparked until Aizawa glared at him. "Why can't I do as I please in my own school, Bakugo? I'm the best, always have been, always will be. I have the best quirk and the best grades. You can't want a null over me. I'd want Hamato Izuku here even if he were quirkless, which he isn't. Quirklessness isn't a reason to deny someone entry. He scored highest on both the written and physical exams. Even if he'd only topped the written, that would have caught my attention. Now, tell me again without slurs or anger, why should I keep you here when you've shown none of the heroic qualities I expect? Why should you stay in the hero course when you can't put others' well-being above your pride? You just can't. Everyone knows power is what counts. Deku is just a quirkless nobody. He must have cheated. The teachers always said he did. Quirkless people are a waste of space. Evolutionary throwbacks. I believe Izuku told you Deku isn't his name, the teacher drawled. Frankly, it sounds like your school has done nothing but feed you dangerous beliefs. If I didn't know better, I'd think your teachers were followers of that nutjob Despero. Quirkless people invented computers, electricity, everything. You can't possibly think quirked people did. Well said, Aizawa. We have a problem. I could expel you, and maybe I should, but that would only make you believe I'm doing it because of Izuku. Instead, you'll get in-school suspension and be transferred to Gen Ed while I arrange counseling. You'd take Deku over me? Just for name-calling? I'd take 100 kids like Izuku over a child who's never been told no and thinks it's not okay to be anything but the best. Aizawa, you may go. Bakugo, we'll discuss your future with your parents. If you use slurs or your quirk against me, I'll treat you as the villain you're becoming. Am I clear? Aizawa tried not to smile as he left. It shouldn't be satisfying to hear his not dad tear into an entitled brat, but it was. Even better, he could now give a deserving kid a chance. He stopped by his husband's class. Hizashi raised an eyebrow but smirked. Hitoshi, you're joining my class on a provisional basis. Come on. And if he was happy to see Hamato make fast friends with a stunned Hitoshi and help the others improve their scores, well, no one else had to know. Toshinori knew he had to see the Hamato kid again. He needed to be sure if the kid was a puppet of that man, he had to know. As much as he struggled to get along with the prickly Aizawa, he knew underground heroes had a keen sense for people. If anyone would notice something off about Izuku, it would be Aizawa. He also needed to find someone to inherit One for All. He hadn't wanted to pass on his quirk, but he was starting to realize he'd have to. If All for One had survived and was still making deals, Toshinori knew he wasn't in any condition for another fight. Leaving society without the one quirk that could stand against All for One wasn't an option. There were interesting candidates in this class. Yaoyorozu's quirk had endless potential, and with One for All, she'd have an infinite reserve. Yet she was hesitant and nervous, not ideal for the next wielder. Kirishima's quirk made him an excellent shield, and he wouldn't have to worry about shattering limbs. Hitoshi Shinso's brainwashing quirk was unsettling, but the idea of a hero who could stop All for One in his tracks was intriguing. And then there was Izuku. The kid showed the same heroic spirit Toshinori wanted to see: kind, soft-spoken, powerful. That quirk was formidable. A hero who could pull through anything would be one of the most powerful since Toshinori himself. Still, he'd have to be sure Izuku wasn't a plant from All for One before making a decision. He didn't know how to choose. There were so many powerful kids in this class alone. Maybe he'd wait until the sports festival to see how they performed under pressure and to know the candidate Mirai had recommended. Yes, that was a good plan. It had nothing to do with wanting to keep One for All a little longer. He just wanted to be sure. Bakugo Katsuki didn't think he'd ever have to see stupid Deku again after the little sheet vanished one day from school. As far as he was concerned, the null could have jumped off a roof and he wouldn't feel a thing, would he? No, he wouldn't. Because they weren't friends. The teachers, the principal, every adult he'd ever been around had told him the same thing the day his powerful quirk had come in, that he was destined for heroics, while others just weren't. It was the way of the world. The strong were meant to protect the weak, and the weak were meant to praise the strong, if they were lucky, or if they were like stupid Deku, they were supposed to be nothing at all. He hadn't expected stupid Deku to not only show up to UA, but to swear at him, to stand up to him. That wasn't what was supposed to have happened. Deku was supposed to be a stepping stone on his way to greatness, nothing more. But once Deku had left him standing there, staring after him, he decided it must be some sort of new method for Deku to F with him. After all, Deku liked to F with him by writing about him in those stupid stalker notebooks of his. Deku liked to F with him by constantly shoving it in their faces that Deku thought he was better than them by not training and yet still dreaming of being a hero. Deku was always looking down on him. If Deku wanted to die in the exam, as he probably would, well then Bakugo could wash his hands of the whole affair by saying, "I told you so," to stupid Deku's stupid face, because he didn't believe a school as good as UA would truly let an examinee die. Get seriously hurt? Yes, die no. Deku would be fine. After all, the little sheet always stood up after being beaten down, as was Deku's due. Deku always stood up, with that same stupid grin. Deku always got back up, no matter what. This would be no different. Bakugo would go on to be number one, and Deku would fail miserably. That was how the story was supposed to go. And yet, when his acceptance letter came in the mail, He wasn't number 1 in the exam, even though he'd racked up a total of 70 points. He'd come in second place. And not only that, but he hadn't come in first place in the paper exam either. He'd always had the best grades in school, so it didn't make any sense for him to fall so low on the exam scale. Surely it must be a mistake. He couldn't have come in second, he couldn't have. He wouldn't be the best if he came in second, and he was the best. Everyone said so. And then, coming into that classroom, he hears the impossible. The blue-haired stick-up his but extra was congratulating Deku for coming in first place in the exam. That was impossible. Deku had to have cheated. Yeah, he had to have. Well, he'll fix that. Except when he goes to hit Deku with his right hook, Deku dodges, and then he is pulled away by the hobo teacher and told that the principal would rather have 100 dekus than him. It doesn't make any sense. What is he supposed to do? This isn't how his story is supposed to go. It isn't fair, it isn't right. This can't be happening. But he can still fix this. He can prove that he is meant to be the best by passing the stupid anger management counseling and pummeling Deku in the sports festival. Then everyone will have to see the truth, that stupid Deku had to have cheated, and when they came to him begging to have him back as they should, well, he'd make them kiss his butt with all the things he'd make them do, including expelling stupid, cheating Deku. Yeah, this wasn't how his story was supposed to go. So it wouldn't, he'd ensure it. If Nedzu was disappointed with having to rearrange his schedule to meet with Hamato, he tried not to show it. He had time, he was sure of that, and now that he knew his suspected predecessor was in the area, and that Hamato Izuku was attending his school, he was a little less concerned with Hamato Splinter disappearing. That didn't mean that he had any less of a headache when his pup stormed into the room and demanded he fire All Might. That incompetent buffoon was supposed to assign a basic obstacle course for the new students to get used to their costumes and see what needed improvement. Not assign battle training. Now we've got Hamato in the infirmary, and Yaoyorozu demanding that I do something about that grapeyist that caused this whole mess. Nedzu's eye twitched. Yes, this truly was a problem. How had it gone so very wrong? Toshinori Yagi All Might truly wanted to make a good impression on his new colleagues. He intended to follow Aizawa's recommended costume review obstacle course. Yet, the urge to see how Izuku would fare in a real-life battle scenario was too tempting. Besides, when the students appeared in their costumes, nothing seemed amiss, at least, not at first glance. He reasoned that a battle simulation was the best way to test the costume's effectiveness. He was sure Aizawa would understand. Yue was never traditional, after all. If things went too far, he could always step in. Confident, he drew names from the Team A, villains Hamato Izuku and Mineta Minoru. Team B, heroes Yaoyorozu Momo and Ishido Mina. Ishido grinned. Oh Momo, we've got this. Yaoyorozu nodded. As long as we stay sharp. Mineta trembled with excitement, muttering, yes, locked in a building with 2 hot girls. Ever. Izuku looked horrified, and for a moment, Toshinori hesitated. Maybe this wasn't the best idea. Still, he rationalized, heroines would have to get used to uncomfortable attention. He didn't like Mineta's comments, but Aizawa hadn't expelled him yet, so perhaps it wasn't too serious. He'd mention it to Aizawa later. As the scenario began, Izuku tried to strategize with Mineta, who was too distracted by his fantasies to contribute. Izuku decided to carry the team, planning to use his grappling hook to create a diversion while Mineta stayed on the ground floor. The plan worked almost. Izuku admired Yaoyorozu's clever traps and Ishido's quick attacks. He managed to outmaneuver Ishido and capture her with the tape. Mina Ishido of the hero team has been incapacitated. Only 4 minutes remaining. He was about to go for the bomb when, boom, a shriek echoed down the hallway. Get away from me, you creep. Izuku and Ishido rushed to the source. Yaoyorozu, in tears, was frantically reloading a beanbag shotgun. Mineta was advancing on her, his sticky ball littering the floor behind her. Izuku lunged to intervene, but another boom rang out. He felt a sharp pain in his leg and crumpled to the ground. Ishido screamed. Yaoyorozu sobbed. Mineta kept advancing until All Might burst into the room. If getting shot by his classmate was the way to get Nedzu to pay attention to the problems with the costumes, Izuku doesn't feel so bad about the outcome. Sure, it had hurt like hell to be shot, and Yaoyorozu has spent the last hour apologizing endlessly as he slept off Recovery Girl's quirk, but no harm no foul, right? And hopefully, this would also teach All Might a valuable lesson that he had to think about how he was doing things. You should be fired, Yagi, Aizawa said flatly, arms crossed. He hadn't even raised his voice. You endangered your students. PRD. Toshinori flinched. You're not wrong. If you want me to resign, Nedzu, I understand. Nedzu's gaze was unreadable. All Might, no teacher is perfect. And while I do wish the incident hadn't occurred, at least one good thing has come of it. Minoru's parents won't be able to claim boys will be boys this time. Not with witnesses and evidence. Nedzu's eyes glittered darkly. Minoru Mineta will face appropriate consequences. Toshinori swallowed. In the meantime, Nedzu continued, I am assigning you additional teaching courses. You will be shadowing every staff member, starting with Aizawa. Learn how to be an educator before you try to act like one. Understood. Content warning, trigger warning, content warning, trigger warning, content warning, trigger warning. Blood seeped from the wound in his side, the same one that had nearly claimed him once before. Around him, the echoes of battle rang out, the clash of his students' powers, Aizawa's fierce resistance, and that eerie, rasping voice of the blue-haired man with hands clinging to his face. And then, within his mind, the vestiges stirred. Hold on, Toshi. Just hold on. You don't need to join us yet. He coughed violently, dark red splattering across the remnants of his costume. Some distant part of him pitied whoever would have to clean it if there was even anything left to clean for the funeral. He wondered who would be the one to tell Gran Torino that he'd fallen. Who would face Mirai, knowing they'd never have the chance to repair what had broken between them. Just hold on, Toshi. Like before. Your students need you. And so do we. Please, hold on. Her voice again. After so long, it was strangely comforting. Part of him wanted to lie still and just listen. Would that really be so terrible? But if he stayed down, who would protect his students? Who would make sure Aizawa survived to scold him later? He tried to rise. His body protested. His strength was draining rapidly, warmth spilling from his side in thick, hot pulses. Don't move, said a voice raspy yet kind. He blinked up, vision swimming. A figure hovered above him, blurred at the edges like a fading dream. He coughed again. The pain hit now, raw and real, no longer dulled by adrenaline or fear. It was the same pain he'd felt when he thought death had come for him before. But this time, the certainty settled heavier. This time, there would be no time left to choose a successor. That thought pierced deeper than any wound. I think I'm dying, he rasped. Will you take my power? He didn't know who they were. Friend or foe, stranger or savior, it didn't matter. The power couldn't die with him. It couldn't. It wouldn't. With the last of his strength, he raised a trembling, bloodied finger and pressed it against their lips. Find Gran Torino, he whispered. He'll help you. And then, finally mercifully, he let his eyes close. Just for a little while. Just long enough to rest. He had been tired for so very long after all. It should be okay just to rest. The morning had started off surprisingly well for Toshinori. He'd managed to skim through Teaching for Dummies a few times, trying to absorb anything useful for the day's lesson. Thankfully, it was just rescue training today. That, at least, was something he understood. Rescue training was physical, tangible, something he could actually do without feeling like he was fumbling through a maze of unfamiliar expectations. Just as he turned a corner, a distant cry for help snapped him to attention. He spotted a purse snatcher sprinting down the street, weaving between pedestrians. His instincts kicked in. He was just about to give chase when his phone rang. He sighed and answered. I hope you're not planning to dash off after every petty crime other heroes are more than capable of handling, Toshinori, came a cheerful but pointed voice. Toshinori flinched slightly. Good morning, Principal Nedzu, he said, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. At that very moment, a new pro-hero appeared, easily apprehending the purse snatcher with practiced efficiency. Toshinori watched, slightly embarrassed. I wasn't going to interfere, he added quickly. Just observing. But today should be easy enough. All you have to do is arrive on time. That's it. Am I clear, Toshinori? Crystal. Thanks for the reminder, he muttered. The call ended, and Toshinori slipped his phone back into his pocket with a quiet sigh. Nedzu had a point. His priorities needed to stay sharp. His job wasn't just to fight crime anymore, it was to teach. To lead the next generation. And that started with being present. Still, as he continued toward UA, he couldn't help but notice the subtle signs around him: an ambulance speeding by, the sound of sirens in the distance, another faint cry for help echoing from a side alley. He clenched his jaw. Every fiber of his being screamed to respond. But no, he had to stay focused. He had to believe that the other heroes had it handled. It's just nerves, he told himself. That's all. Just nerves. But deep down, something didn't feel right. He still couldn't believe it. His classmates had nominated him to be class president. Useless, Deku. It was already surreal enough to be making friends, including the perpetually sleep-deprived Hitoshi. And even more bizarre when Katsuki was kicked out of class on the first day for attacking him, instead of being praised for disciplining the weak, like in middle school. Still, it felt good. He'd always wondered what it would be like to be someone people liked, someone others respected like Katsuki. He supposed now he understood, a little. Though he doubted Katsuki had ever appreciated the people who admired him. Not with the way he barked insults and called everyone extras. There was a buzz of excitement as the class boarded the bus, and he had to stifle a laugh when Ida looked downright betrayed by the lack of a seating chart. The nerves still churned under the surface, though. Maybe it was just the aftermath of the press intrusion earlier. But he and Uraraka had handled it. He'd yelled at a bunch of upperclassmen to act like hero students, and somehow, it had worked. It had to be just nerves, right? Izuku, Azui said from beside him, her voice calm, I always say what's on my mind. Your quirk doesn't make any sense. Ah. He flushed. It's not complicated. I was a late bloomer. I've only had my quirk for the last few months. I've had to work hard to learn what others know from birth. Dude, that's so manly. Kirishima grinned. You've got such control already. My quirk's just hardening, and it still took me forever to figure out how to use it properly. Don't sell yourself short, Kirishima. A hardening quirk is just as valid as any other. Eyes forward, Hellions, Aizawa drawled from the front. This isn't a field trip. This is training. Behave. Izuku was grateful the questions stopped. It was nice, really nice to have classmates who didn't hate him. But at the same time, it all felt foreign. He didn't know how to be around people who weren't just waiting for him to fail. He stepped off the bus and spotted All Might and 13 waiting. A part of him twisted with conflicting emotions. He was still upset with All Might for that first encounter with the Sludge villain, but there was no denying he was a hero. Maybe the best person to teach them. Then the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. A portal began to form, swirling purple mist at the edge of the plaza. It wasn't his portal, but it looked dangerously familiar. His breath caught. 13, protect the students. All Might with me. Aizawa shouted. Panic surged. Instinct kicked in, and he tried to summon his quirk, something, anything. But the portal wielder's ability so close to his own was disrupting the space. His portals flickered, and then the villains opened wide. He barely had time to scream before the world dropped out beneath them. Falling. I want my dad. His quirk activated on reflex, warped by desperation and interference. He hit water, hard-winded, gasping. Something coiled around his waist, and he flailed in panic until he realized it was Azui. He blinked and they were on a boat. Hitoshi was with them, dripping wet. They were safe. For now. Thanks, Azui. Call me Tsu. Ribbit. He tried to calm himself. All Might was here. They would be fine. They just had to hold out. Hitoshi didn't look convinced. He resembled a drowned cat, and even Azui was tense. Okay, Izuku began. We've got two choices. We stay here and hope no one sinks the boat, or we rescue ourselves and head for the plaza. I don't think we get to pick, Hitoshi muttered, nodding to the edge of the boat. Villains were closing in. One raised an arm and began shaping water into a massive blade. Sheet. Plan B then, Izuku snapped. What are your quirks? Frog, Azui said. I can swim, jump, cling to walls and eject my stomach. Brainwashing, Hitoshi added reluctantly. If someone responds to me, I can control them. And mine's portal pull, I summon what I think of. But something about that villain's quirk is interfering. He paused, mind racing. But with your quirks? They couldn't have put us in a better spot unless they knew our quirks, which they didn't. No offense taken, Azui replied simply. I'll look for anything on the boat we can use as a distraction, Izuku said. If that fails, Hitoshi, you brainwash the guy with the water blade. Hitoshi looked pale but nodded. Izuku scrambled through the cabin and found a miracle, gasoline and matches. He returned quickly. We have our distraction. Content warning, trigger warning. Content warning, trigger warning. Content warning, trigger warning. He poured the gas over the edge of the boat, letting it float across the water's surface. Back off, he shouted. Or I light this place up like a Christmas tree. You wouldn't dare. He didn't get the chance to respond. The water exploded around them as a cannon of compressed liquid smashed through the hull. The boat lurched violently and began to sink. There was no time to think. He struck the match and dropped it. Go! They leapt. Azui's powerful legs launched them clear of the fire. The water below ignited in a horrifying whoosh. The screams from the villains still echoed in his ears as they hit the shore. The smell of burning flesh turned his stomach. But there was no time to be sick, because in front of them all might was down. A monstrous, blood-slicked hand was embedded in his side, his body slumped and unmoving. The creature that had done it stood tall, regenerating an arm that had been severed. Waiting. Aizawa wasn't doing much better, bleeding heavily, barely standing. You really are cool, Eraserhead, the man with the hands said mockingly. But come on. Gummit. Surrender and I'll let you live. I'm a fan. Shut up, Aizawa spat, teeth gritted. We're not done yet. The symbol of peace is dying in front of you. Just give in. He's not dead yet, Aizawa growled, but even Izuku could tell it was a bluff. Then something caught his eye. A flicker. A shadow. Somehow his portal had worked. Splinter was here. And with him came a presence like a thunderstorm wrapped in fury, ancient, heavy, other. Splinter growled a deep, soul-chilling sound that felt like it came from a dozen voices at once. Then he charged. Kill him! Shigaraki screamed. Izuku didn't want to watch. He couldn't not watch. Splinter was caught mid-lunge, grabbed by his bad leg and hurled. The snap of bone was sharp, unmistakable. His body sailed through the air like a ragdoll. Izuku! Your katana! He's glad he kept it, and asked for a holder to be put onto his back, though he fumbles. Thankfully, Hitoshi grabs it from his back and tosses it, and a black tendril whips out, grabbing it from the air. And then he watches in horrified fascination as his dad runs forward, katana in paw, jumping at the last second, using the black tendrils to boost him, and then falling onto the back of the creature. He hears an awful squelching noise as the katana stabs downward, and then he can't see anything as a thick black fog rolls in. And then there is the sound of guns firing. Look away, kids. He hears Yamada-sensei say. He turned away, trembling, bile rising in his throat. The metallic scent in the air told him everything he needed to know. My dad, he whispered, voice cracking. Is my dad okay? No one answered. And all he could feel was guilt. Crushing, burning guilt. There's something deeply comforting about sending one of his children off to school, even if it is a hero school. He finds himself smiling at the thought of Michelangelo, who would have loved the excitement, would have been overjoyed to help his brother design a costume. But that smile fades quickly. A strange tingle runs through his fur, low and persistent, like a warning bell only he can hear. He tries to reassure himself. This world has been far kinder than the one he came from. He had been the one to encourage Izuku to go, to pursue a future that Donatello never got the chance to reach. He sees so much of Donnie in the boy, sharp, thoughtful, curious. And school, after all, is supposed to be a place of growth, not danger. But it isn't just school. It's hero school. And here, Being a hero is more than tights and capes. It's closer to being a soldier, a police officer. It means putting your life on the line. He isn't comfortable with that, not when it involves one of his sons. But it's Izuku's dream. And he had never stood in the way of his son's dreams, not when the only chance the others had to chase theirs came after the Shredder was gone. So, he's never ignored his instincts before. And they're screaming at him now. So when a shaky portal opens beneath his feet, he's already bracing for something terrible. Content warning, trigger warning. Content warning, trigger warning. Content warning, trigger warning. He isn't ready for the blood. He lands in a plaza, right at the feet of a man who reminds him eerily of Silver Sentry, but this man is bleeding out. Dying. And still trying to stand. Don't move, he says gently, crouching beside him. I think I'm dying, the man rasps. Will you take my power? He doesn't understand, not fully, but he knows. It's this man's final wish. He nods silently. The man shoves a trembling, bloodied finger into his mouth. It's disgusting, but he does not flinch. Find Gran Torino, the man whispers. He'll help you. Then pressure. Crashing into his mind like a wave. It reminds him of that creature that once forced him to see horrifying visions. But this isn't like that. These presences feel different. Familiar. Gentle. Powerful. You are not who we expected. But perhaps you are who we need. Toshi. My poor Toshi. Looks like you'll need a crash course fast. I'm Yoichi. What you're feeling is one for all. That pressure, that weight, it's us. And our quirks. You'll have access to all of them. Maybe not what we planned for the 9th, but we'll work with it. Before he can ask anything, he sees them, children. Familiar ones. His child. And nearby, something monstrous. A creature, grotesque and wrong, standing just yards from the kids. Waiting. Watching. Kill him, someone shouts. Then it's on him. Moving impossibly fast. Pain explodes through him as the creature grabs his bad leg and crushes his hip. It hurts more than the time Draco broke it. Much more. But there's no time for pain. He bites down, sharp and vicious, making the creature roar and hurl him away. He hits the ground hard. The jolt nearly makes him black out. But he won't fall. He can't. A deep, growling snarl rumbles from his throat, echoed by the chorus of voices in his mind. They roar with him. I will not fall. I will not fall. I will not fall. Izuku. Your katana, he shouts. The blade flies through the air. He leaps to catch it. Something lashes out from his body, yanking it toward him, pain shooting through him as it does. That's my quirk, Black Whip. It feeds on emotion. No time for thanks. He charges forward, katana in hand. Black Whip launches him into the air. He slams downward, driving the blade into the creature's skull. It shrieks, thrashes, tries to shake him loose. But he won't let go. He bites again, deeper this time, tearing through bone and nerve. He ignores the taste, ignores the screams, ignores the part of him that knows what he's doing. He doesn't stop. Not until the body slumps, twitching. So, he staggers, chest heaving, spitting out what's left. Pain floods him, leg shattered, hip crushed, vision swimming. But he doesn't drop. Not yet. He grips the katana and wraps Black Whip around his bad leg, using both to prop himself up. I will not fall. I will not fall. I will not fall. The smoke comes suddenly, pouring from his mouth in thick, black clouds. He coughs, but he's grateful. It hides the corpse. The children don't need to see what he just did. Then gunfire. He flinches. But it's not aimed at him. It's at the young man with the hands, the one who ordered the kill. You haven't seen the last of me, the villain screams, retreating. And then, quiet. He hears someone calling for the children, ushering them away to safety. Only then does he let himself collapse. Nedzu stared silently at the cluster of images and data laid out before him. An X-ray, an MRI, a CAT scan, and a full DNA analysis, each one a piece of a disturbing puzzle. And together, they confirmed what he had feared. If it weren't so, painfully obvious how much he's suffered, Chio murmured, gesturing toward the scans, I'd be asking how the hell this was even possible. The X-rays alone were telling, particularly the leg the Nomu had shattered. It had clearly been broken once before, and recently. But what stood out most was the rapid, unnatural growth in the bone structure, almost as if the body had tried to rebuild itself faster than biology should allow. And then there's this, Chiyo continued, pointing to the DNA sample on the monitor. Her voice dropped, tinged with disbelief. No offense to the geniuses who developed your own remarkable quirk, Nedzu, but this is something else entirely. She zoomed in on the strand, where 3 distinct genetic markers danced across the screen. We're looking at rat DNA, human DNA, and something else. Unidentified. Interwoven like a forced splice, not a natural mutation. She paused, frowning. It's like someone took an ordinary rat, slammed human DNA into it, then exposed the result to a catalyst, something that triggered multiple parts of the brain all at once. Language centers, quirk processing regions associated with mental and psychic types, all highly active. She leaned back and crossed her arms. If I didn't know better, I'd say this was the work of a completely different organization than the one that developed your quirk. Or worse, someone affiliated with that monster from the USJ. Her eyes flicked back to the DNA sequence. He has the same marker, the same telltale sign of multiple quirks being artificially embedded. Whoever did this had knowledge, resources, and absolutely no regard for ethics. It's a tragedy, really. Someone this brilliant, using their genius for evil. It was all he could manage. There were too many thoughts crowding his mind. The confirmation of his theory that the person he'd seen on his pup's cameras was indeed his predecessor. The urgency of arranging an experimental surgery to repair the shattered remains of that predecessor's leg. The implications of the Nomu possessing multiple quirks, and what that meant for the future. And hanging over it all like a storm cloud, the hardest truth of all. He would have to inform the Hero Public Safety Commission that All Might had fallen. Tashinori had held on longer than expected, long enough for the people who mattered most to him to say goodbye. His loyal sidekick Mirai, the steadfast detective Tsukachi, and a retired hero from another era, Gran Torino. They'd all come to his bedside before his body finally gave out. Nedzu had hoped that offering Tashinori a position at UA would allow him to retire with dignity. To live out his remaining days not as a symbol, but as a mentor. A teacher. A man finally free of the impossible weight he had carried for so long. But now, he would never get that peace. Never see the sunrise on a world he helped save. And though One for All was safe for now, entrusted to Splinter, Nedzu knew it was only a matter of time before All for One moved again. He could ask the HPSC to delay the announcement of All Might's death, and he likely would. As much as it pained him to obscure the truth, the consequences of a public reveal were far too dire. A crime wave unlike anything seen in decades would follow, and the current hero roster simply wasn't ready for that kind of chaos. For now, silence would be protection. The official story could be that several heroes were injured in the USJ incident. Only a handful of people, himself, Chiyo, Gran Torino, and Mirai, knew the truth. And he trusted every one of them to guard it. His ear twitched at the sound of shouting in the hallway. Chiyo moved to check the commotion, leaving the door cracked just enough for him to hear the sobs. "Please, you have to let me see him. That's my dad, and it's my fault he was even there. If I hadn't panicked and used my quirk to bring him to the USJ, he wouldn't have gotten hurt." "Izuku," Chiyo said gently, "he's in a medically induced coma. It's for both quirk exhaustion and to keep him from waking up in pain. All the bones in his leg were shattered. I shouldn't even be telling you this much, but he's going to be okay." A smaller voice piped up, high and trembling. "Is Dad going to die?" He tilted his head slightly. That voice was too young. How had someone that small gotten into the school? Stepping closer to the doorway, he caught sight of a tiny girl with silver hair and a horn peeking out from behind Izuku, clinging to him the way frightened children always clung to older siblings. "Izuku," he asked gently, "and who is this?" Izuku turned, brushing away the tears clinging to his face. "This is my sister, Eri." "Well, hello there, Eri," he said with a soft smile. Eri tilted her head, eyes wide. "You look like Dad. Are you his brother?" He chuckled. "No, little one. I'm not his brother." He looked over to Chiyo. "Let them in." Chio hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. Just be careful, kids. Eri approached the bed, face scrunched in sadness and worry. Would it help if I used my curse? Izuku knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Eri, Dad and I both told you it's not a curse. It's your quirk. But we'd have to ask the nurse if it's safe. We wouldn't want to accidentally hurt him, right? I've been practicing, she insisted. Dad's been helping me meditate, and I rewinded bugs. They're fine now, I can do it. Chio blinked. Rewinding? Izuku? He asked, a slow chill creeping into his spine. Her quirk, Izuku explained. Eri can rewind time on living beings. That changed everything. He had already been considering placing this little family under protective custody, just for Splinter's sake. Being his confirmed predecessor made him too valuable. But now, Splinter had one for all. He was biologically Nomu-like. And he was the guardian of two extremely powerful children, one with a terrifyingly rare quirk. No matter what cover story they used, pretending to be related to Mei Hatsume's family wouldn't keep the HPSC from eventually swooping in. He and Chio exchanged a look. They both knew the odds. Even with experimental surgery, Splinter's leg might never fully heal. And the change in fur color gray to brown told him Eri had already used her quirk on Splinter once before. Eri, Izuku said carefully, you need to focus. Just rewind the injury to Dad's leg. That's all. Once that's fixed, he just needs to sleep off the exhaustion. Eri nodded, determination etched onto her small face. He and Chio stepped back as she approached the bed. She gently laid her hand on Splinter's leg, her horn beginning to glow. The sound was horrible, bone grinding, snapping, reforming. He grimaced. Eri whimpered. Izuku took her hand and held it tightly, grounding her. Eri, he said softly, you can stop now. Chio stepped forward with the portable X-ray machine and quickly scanned the leg. She blinked, then smiled. The only injury left is the old fracture, she said, awe in her voice. Remarkable. If you ever consider a future in heroics, young lady, I'd be honored to mentor you. He nodded. Truly incredible. But also dangerous. He turned to Izuku. Listen carefully. Your family is a target now. If word gets out that your father has access to what amounts to a living fountain of youth, the HPSC won't be the only ones interested. And Splinter's quirk, the villain who set up the USJ, would recognize it. That alone is reason enough to act. Izuku swallowed. So, what does that mean? I'm invoking my right as a hero to place all three of you under protective custody. Effective immediately. What? Izuku gasped. You know as well as I do that Splinter didn't have that quirk going into the USJ. That alone would raise alarm bells. But add Eri into the mix? If word gets out that Splinter's guardianship isn't legally binding, Eri could be taken from you either into the HPSC's care, or worse. And we both know what worse could mean. Izuku's voice trembled. Will we be allowed to stay with him? If we agree to this? Of course, he said gently. Separating you was never the plan. Once your father wakes, we'll move you all to my apartment. You likely don't have many belongings to pack. He smiled faintly. And, well, I find myself short one heroics instructor. If we give the HPSC a story, say, that Splinter is stepping into that role, it gives us cover. And they know better than to interfere with my staff. That protection extends to you all. Eri looked up at Izuku, eyes searching. He nodded. Excellent, he said with a sigh. One problem solved. He glanced back at Splinter, still unconscious. Just a million more to go. Leonardo had noticed the change long before anyone said anything. Truthfully, they all had. But none of them brought it up, not directly. Only hushed comments passed between them through shell cell messages, because as great a father and sensei as Splinter was, he was hopeless with technology. Ever since that incident involving the internet, he'd become even more wary of tech than before. It wasn't like Leo or his brothers were stupid. Sure, none of them matched Donatello's genius, but they weren't oblivious. As the team's leader and eldest in spirit, Leo had always been the first to spot shifts in the group. And it wasn't a new realization, this looming awareness that their father was aging. Splinter had always been older, ever since they were young. But there had been something comforting in the way he'd moved back then, full of grace, power, and a quiet confidence. Now it was different. He moved slower, his joints stiffer, his breaths just a bit more labored. He winced more often than he used to. And like everything else, their father kept it all hidden behind displacement and calm words. Just like he had always hidden his pain. Leo understood. Their father had always walked a fine line: mentor, protector, provider. He wasn't ready to be the one cared for. Not yet. Still, Leo couldn't sit still and watch time wear Splinter down. With peace finally a reality in their world, he and his brothers had started building lives, ones that might, someday, support not just themselves, but the man who had given up everything for them. He and Raph, once constantly butting heads, had found common ground running a ninjutsu studio. It brought in money and gave Raph an outlet to show off his skill. Donatello had enrolled at university, determined to prove that being a mutant didn't mean giving up the right to learn alongside humans. And Mikey had thrown himself into the justice force, winning the public over with charm and heart. They were trying to build something stable, something safe, something that might show their father it was okay to rest, that it was okay to let go. April had offered the farmhouse as a retirement option: quiet, peaceful, green. But none of them could ignore the weight of all their father had already sacrificed for them. Asking him to leave the city, the lair, their home, felt like too much. Even Leo, for all his displacement, didn't want to stray far from the only home he'd ever known. Still, the surface offered things the underground never could. Real doctors, real medicine, access to allies like the Utrams, who had once helped when their father had been gravely injured. But none of that could stop time. None of that could stop the ache in Leo's chest when he noticed how often Splinter's steps faltered, how tightly he clutched his cane when he thought no one was watching. Time was not their ally. That was why they'd all been checking in more often, dropping by the lair, sitting with him, watching, waiting, hoping. But when Leo stepped into the lair that day, something felt off. It was silent. Not unusual. But dust covered the floor. That was unusual. Dust didn't last long in the sewers, not with the constant moisture, not with anyone walking around. But the dojo door was closed, and that was odd too. Splinter never closed it. Not when they were kids. Not even after they'd stopped using it daily. The bedroom doors, all of them, were shut. Another chill crawled up Leo's shell. He padded silently through the lair, heart pounding harder with every step. He reached his father's door and paused. No sound came from inside, but that wasn't unusual either. Silence was second nature to all of them. Still, something wasn't right. He raised a hand and knocked softly. The door creaked open under the light pressure. The room was empty. Worse, it hadn't been lived in for days. The bed remained made. The scent of incense had long since faded. The tiny things that made the space feel like Splinter's, his cup of tea, the corner mat where he meditated, the book he was always halfway through, were missing. And then Leo saw it. On the small desk, barely visible in the dim light. A letter. He crossed the room in 2 quick steps and picked it up. His hands were trembling even before he unfolded it. He read the first line and his stomach dropped. Frantically, he fumbled with his shell cell, dialing his brothers on instinct alone. Michelangelo knows what everyone sees when they look at him. The class clown. The screw-up. The prankster. The one who's always got a joke on his tongue, even when no one's laughing. And they're not wrong, not completely. He is the fun one. He always has been. When they were little, it was his job. He made it his job to keep things light. To crack a joke when the air got too heavy. To pull a prank when Rafa's anger was one spark away from burning the whole lair down. To be loud when Leo's silence became unbearable. To distract Donnie when the weight of being the smartest person in the room became a curse instead of a gift. Because somebody had to. Somebody had to be sunshine in the sewer. And Mikey could handle people laughing at him if it meant his brothers didn't cry. But being the comic relief doesn't mean he's blind. He's always been the one most in touch with his feelings, his own and everyone else's. He sees it, even if his brothers don't say it out loud. The way they check in more often, how Raph hovers a little longer after sparring, how Donnie's scans are suddenly more detailed, more frequent, more worried. How Leo, who rarely asks for help, has been trying to shoulder all of it like he can keep time from moving just by sheer will. And Splinter? Splinter moves like a man with 100 hidden pains. He hides them, of course. He always has. That's what Sensei does. He guards his hurts behind old wisdom and tired smiles. But Mikey sees it. The stiffness in the mornings. The wince he tries to mask when he thinks no one's watching. The faraway look in his eyes that lingers just a few seconds too long. The sighs that aren't just breath, but something being let go. He knows. He knows what's coming. He just doesn't know what to do about it. Because what does the class clown do when the laughter stops? His shell cell rings, sharp and sudden, and he jumps like he's been hit. His stomach drops. Come home, Michelangelo. Father. The voice is clipped. Tight. Like Leo had to force the words past something breaking in his throat. Mikey doesn't let Leo finish. He doesn't want him to. That I'm on my way. His hands shake as he lowers the shell cell. He stares at it, like it might light up again and say it was all a mistake. That it was just about groceries, or a patrol update, or anything but this. He knows his brothers love him. He knows his father does too. But for all their affection, no one's ever expected Mikey to be the serious one. And now if this is what he thinks it is, he doesn't know if he can be the fun one anymore. Doesn't know if he should be. Because what happens when the one who makes everyone else laugh is the one breaking inside? He swallows hard, shoulders his nunchucks, and runs home like a storm is coming. Raph has always been the hit first, talk later kind of turtle. The walking, grunting, red-masked fist of the family. The one everyone expected to blow up when things went sideways. They weren't wrong. Anger was his armor. Always had been. It was easier than dealing with fear. Or guilt. Or heartbreak. Because those things didn't just make you feel bad, they cracked you. And if Raph let himself crack, even once, who knows what would come spilling out. He'd always used that anger to protect the people he loved. When one of his brothers was hurt, when the enemy came too close to home, when he couldn't do anything to stop it, that's when the anger lit up inside him. Like fire in his blood. At least with anger, he felt powerful. Useful. But lately, it hasn't been helping. Not when he saw Splinter fall to all fours during that fight with the Cyber Shredder. Not when he started sleeping more. Eating less. Moving like gravity finally caught up with him. Raph hates that. Hates that they finally clawed their way to something close to normal, only for it to come with an expiration date. They built a dojo. Together. He never thought he'd enjoy teaching, but watching kids find their strength? Helping them learn how to defend themselves? It feels good. And it makes Splinter proud. But every proud smile comes a little slower now. Every word of advice is softer, like it costs more to say. Every, I am fine, is more of a lie. They all see it. Even Mikey stopped pretending it wasn't happening. And Raph? He's just mad. So mad. Because what's the point of peace if the person who fought hardest for it doesn't get to enjoy it? What's the point of being strong when you can't punch time in the face? His shell cell buzzes. The screen lights up. His chest tightens. He doesn't want to pick up. Doesn't want to hear what he already knows. He answers anyway. Raph. It's father, come home. Just that. Tense. Leo's voice cracking like a branch under too much weight. Raph stares at the shell cell. His hand tightens around it, hard enough that the plastic creaks. He doesn't move. Doesn't breathe. For one terrifying second, he thinks he might throw it against the wall. But what would that solve? What the hell is anger good for now? His fists can't fix this. His strength doesn't matter. He can't carry Splinter on his back and make him young again. He can't scare death away. All he can do is go home. And face it. Face the one fight none of them were trained for. Donatello has always been the smartest of his brothers, and that had never bothered him. It meant he learned faster. It meant he could fix their wounds when nobody else could. It meant their family depended on him. And he liked that. The logic. The control. Understanding the world made it less scary. But understanding doesn't make it hurt any less. He's known for a while now. Long before his brothers said anything. Maybe even before Splinter admitted it to himself. Their father is old. Not just older. Not just tired. And yes, technically, Splinter had always been old. But there was a difference between aging and the slowness, the stiffness. The days where Splinter would sit a little too long in meditation and struggle to stand afterward. Donnie had tried to rationalize it at first. He's recovering from the last fight. He just needs to rest. But science doesn't lie. And pain doesn't negotiate. So he asked more to. At first, it was just curiosity. Scientific interest, he told himself. Then it was necessity. They deserved to know, even if none of them had asked. And Mortu, honest and awkward as always, gave him the best guess the Utrum could offer. Splinter was biologically around 50 in human years. Maybe older. Rats don't track time like humans do. Not before mutation. Not after. Mutagen may have twisted their DNA into something more human, but it hadn't gifted them immortality. In some ways, it had given them the worst of both worlds: human frailty wrapped in something alien and unpredictable. Donatello remembers nodding, thanking Mortu, acting like he hadn't just felt the floor drop out beneath him. Because it confirmed everything he feared: they were running out of time. And worst of all, there was nothing he could do to stop it. He's read every paper, cross-referenced every data set, studied every anomaly in the mutagen's effects. He's tried to estimate cellular decay rates, tested neurodegeneration markers. He's run simulations and written formulas and stared at the same line of code until his eyes blurred. But there is no cure for time. So he focuses on other things. College courses, tech repairs, even pointless lectures on human philosophy, just to keep his mind busy. He buries himself in knowledge so he doesn't drown in grief. And then his shell cell rings. He sees the name. His hands go cold. His heart skips like it forgot how to beat. He already knows what this is. He picks up. Don, it's father. Come home. Just 6 words. But they hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. Because for all his intelligence, for all his brilliance and genius and invention, he can't do a DMN thing now. No logic. No code. No tech. No plan. Just heartbreak. And the slow, cruel realization that sometimes the smartest guy in the room is still completely helpless. My sons. A letter is not how I wish to say goodbye. But time is short now. I feel it. And I believe you feel it too. I could not leave without saying this. You deserve to know how proud I am of you all. So very proud. From the moment I first saw you. 4 tiny shells in green light. You were my purpose. My peace. My joy. But I'm tired now. Each day. Slower. Each breath. Heavier. The pain has grown. And I cannot ignore it any longer. I wish to go. To my beginnings. To the ancient one. And when the time comes, to lie beside my master. In silence. Before then, please, let me say this. Leonardo. My son. My steady hand. I am sorry. That's too much. You were only a boy. And I made you into a leader. Too soon. Too fast. I see the burden. The pressure in your eyes. The pain in your back. From carrying us all. You did not deserve that weight. Please, my son. Be more than a leader. Be yourself. Be free. Donatello. My brilliant one. You always saw what we could not. Your mind is sharp. But I know it cuts you too. You are trying to fix what cannot be fixed. I am not a broken machine, Donatello. A tired old rat. You gave me pride beyond words. Let that be enough. Michelangelo. My light. My laughter. You kept us whole. Even when the world did not understand you. You smiled. You loved. You were the warmth in the cold. Never. Let the world make you hard. Please. Keep shining, my sun. Even when I am gone. Prophet. My fire. My storm. We fought. Often. I know. But you were never disobedient. You were afraid of losing us. So you fought the world for us. I see you now. You are a teacher. A protector. You have become more than I ever hoped. Forgive me. For the times I did not see the pain beneath your fists. My sons. This is not the end. Not truly. As long as you walk together. As brothers. As long as the Hamato name lives in your hearts. I am with you. Boys. When your journey is done. And the snow falls quiet. We will meet again. Until then, hold one another close. Be brave. Be gentle. Be kind. You were my greatest joy. Your father. Hamato Splinter chapter text. He's going to be very loopy for a while, Chio warned, her voice calm but firm. It's the price of the quirk we use to put him under. Keep a close eye on him, and whatever you do, don't let him leave. Nedzu smiled, already committed. I assure you, my apartment is well equipped for someone like me. With the children there, he won't be alone. He had already decided the moment he saw Splinter's picture. If this truly was his predecessor, then Nedzu would keep him close. He called his pup Shoyuta to help move Splinter. Eri had mended the shattered leg, but both he and Chio agreed. Splinter shouldn't walk on it until they were certain it had healed properly. Izuku bounced nervously at the prospect of staying in a pro-hero's home, while Eri clung to his side, peeking out from behind him with wary eyes. Inside the apartment, Splinter began to stir. He shifted in the wheelchair, like he couldn't decide if he wanted to stand or sink deeper. Brown eyes fluttered open, blinking against the light, and then his face wrinkled with pain. His gaze landed on Shoyuta, and grief twisted across his face. "And Masher?" Splinter slurred, the word warped but unmistakable. "I show you die. I couldn't stop. Too small, too useless? I'm not small anymore, Masher. I can protect you now." Nedzu's heart clenched. Then Splinter's eyes drifted toward him, soft and assessing. They flicked over his fur, his scars, his strange bright eyes. "Did Tangshin bring a new pet to keep me company?" Splinter asked, his tone oddly fond. "He's pretty, but so small." Nedzu flushed, caught off guard. He never thought of himself that way, not with his scars, not with the weight he carried. But the words still struck something tender in his chest. He could see it in Splinter's eyes, someone else who had once tried so hard to be good. To be wanted. To survive. Shoyuta didn't seem as moved. He crossed his arms. "I'm no one's master. But if it makes you feel better, I forgive you. Now come on, let's get you to bed." "Show kind, Masher," Splinter mumbled, head tilting as sleep tried to pull him back under. With Izuku's help, they guided him into Nedzu's bedroom. It was a large space one Nedzu had made sure would never feel like a cage. Blankets and cushions were piled everywhere, a deliberate comfort against the cold, sterile memories of laboratory cages' floors. Shoyuta paused at the edge of the room, looking like he'd reached his limit for the day. "You can go now, Shoyuta," Nedzu offered gently. But Splinter whimpered, reaching out with trembling paws. "No, Masher, don't go. I want a hug. Could Neva hug you before?" Before anyone could respond, black tendrils curled out from Splinter's back, gentle, almost curious in the way they reached out. One by one, they wrapped around Shoyuta, Nedzu, Izuku, and Eri, tugging them all into the bed in a tangled heap of limbs and blankets. Nedzu let out a squeak as he was drawn close, but he didn't protest. Shoyuta tried to rise, his quirk flickering, but each time, a tendril drifted over his eyes, as if it instinctively knew where Shuta's quirk resided. "Just go with it, Shuta pup," Nedzu murmured, already nestling in. "He'll probably let go once he's asleep." "Probably." Izuku giggled softly, his nerves easing. Eri pressed close against his side, then against Splinter's chest, slowly relaxing into the warmth. Splinter, half dreaming and half awake, curled around them like he was guarding a den. One arm draped over Shoyuta. Another over Izuku. Eri snuggled in against his chest. His tail looped over Nedzu's, and in return, Nedzu allowed his own to curl back. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of steady breathing, the quiet thump of hearts, and the rustle of fabric as the group settled. Nedzu let himself sink into the warmth. Just this once. Maybe it was okay to let the animal inside win. To be part of a pack. To let himself be held, and to hold in return. Together. Even if he hadn't planted a spy at UA to discover who All Might had passed his quirk to, he would have known. Because that quirk had been his first. It was just one of many quirks gifted to him in the early days, given by those who couldn't use them, didn't want them, or thought they deserved something better. But this one had been different. The moment it entered his growing collection, he knew it was special. powerful. And more than that, it had the potential to make his sickly younger brother strong enough that their family would no longer fear every trip to the hospital might be his last. They were both born white-haired, oddities even in their own home. Meta ability or not, they stood out. Their parents hated it. So did he. But he had learned early that life was not fair. And in his youth, before he understood how deep cruelty could run, he'd thought giving that quirk to Yoichi was a kindness. If he had known what it would lead to, the rebellion, the betrayal, the foolish romance with a so-called freedom fighter, he would never have given it away. But he learned something unexpected. Something vital. That quirk didn't just stockpile strength, it held echoes of those who carried it. A piece of each wielder, locked inside. When it passed from Yoichi to the second user, he discovered he could still sense it. That bond never broke. He could feel each successor, every spark of defiance, every moment they thought they'd gotten the better of him. Especially the second, who tried again and again to end him. He remembered the frustration growing behind the man's eyes as every ambush failed. Eventually, Hisashi got bored and tracked the fool down himself. The second died trying to destroy him in a last-ditch kamikaze strike. But it didn't end there. It never did. Each time the quirk moved on, he followed. He gave them all the same choice. Surrender what was rightfully his, or watch everyone they loved burn. Not one ever took the offer. He could live forever, but his patience had its limits. By the time he reached the seventh and her brat successor, he was done playing the same game. So he changed tactics. If he couldn't reclaim one for all by force, he would outgrow it. He would build something better. The woman had green hair, a silly quirk that attracted small objects. Harmless. But meta abilities evolved quickly across generations. If his child inherited even a portion of his power combined with a useful quirk, they could surpass what One for All had ever become. But he hadn't accounted for the quirkless genes still far too common in his time. The boy was a failure. So he left. Played the role of the careless drunk, the absent father. It was easier to let the fantasy die than stay and watch it rot. All Might's rise had infuriated him. The eighth user had succeeded where all others had failed, uniting the world under a symbol of peace. The doctor kept him alive, patching together body and spirit, while Hisashi simmered in a pit of bitter regret and unspent vengeance. Then Tenko Shimura fell into his lap. A bloodline gift from the seventh. And oh, how satisfying it had been to twist that legacy into something monstrous. But now the game had shifted again. He knew One for All had been passed on. The pull of it was undeniable, and TMT. His spy at UA had confirmed it. All Might was dead, and they were trying to keep it quiet. Nedzu, Chio, Gran Torino, Mirai, and that detective thought they could bury it beneath good intentions and hollow strength. But All for One didn't need to guess. He had been waiting. The new user had to be among the students present at the USJ. They were vulnerable, still green, still unsure of their power. Easy prey. Especially once the spy narrowed the list. The sports festival was coming. And there was no world where UA would cancel it. They'd want to look strong, impenetrable. The perfect trap for the idealistic. Let them parade their students for the world. All for One would be watching. Waiting. And when the time came when the new One for All user revealed themselves, he would take back what was his. One way or another. The girl, his key to the future, the only one who could unlock the cure this broken world so desperately needed, was gone. Chisaki had made sure the guard who'd been drunk on the job that night paid dearly for his failure. The man had regretted the day he was born long before Chisaki was finished with him. But pain wasn't a solution, and retribution didn't bring Eri back. The real problem still loomed. Eri had vanished without a trace. He'd checked every possibility. It hadn't been one of the heroes, on his payroll, having a sudden moral crisis. It wasn't a rogue cop loyal to his old man's ways. None of them had touched her. That somehow made it worse. If it had been a traitor, he could have carved the truth out of their skin. But this? This was silence. No witnesses. No alarms. Just a child disappearing into the night, as if she had never existed. It infuriated him. Still, Kai Chisaki wasn't the type to panic. He hadn't clawed his way to the top of the Yakuza food chain without learning how to deal with problems, especially the ones that didn't want to be found. He had time. He had contacts. He had resources. And when he finally tracked down the person who had stolen Eri, he would make them suffer. Because Eri wasn't just a child. She was the cornerstone of his vision, the cure for the chaos infecting society. And he always got back what was his. Eventually. He never imagined he could feel this happy. His master's stern, composed, rarely ever soft had gone still beneath his arm, relaxing in a way Yoshi never could in the presence of Tang Shen or Orokusaki. But Splinter couldn't blame him. The Ancient One had been a good teacher, but a terrible parent. He'd trained Yoshi and Saki long past the limits of childhood, grinding them into warriors before they were ever allowed to be kids. And even before that, Splinter was fairly certain Yoshi hadn't exactly had a warm upbringing. It showed in little things. Like the way Yoshi used to sneak food from the temple kitchen late at night, just enough to share with Orokusaki and Tangshin, always saving a little scrap for the rat in the cage. Tangshin. Where was she? She always greeted him when he woke up, brushing her fingers along his head with a smile, joking that he'd be their test student, her little Hamato Splinter. He really should thank her for saving his life when he got caught in that rat trap, and for giving him something even greater, a new family. And a new friend. No, a mate? Tangshin had always been so kind, so gentle. She never looked at him like he was a pest or a monster. And now she'd given him a pretty mate, he was sure of it now. He just hoped he hadn't scared her off yet. Humans got so skittish around him. And well, his new powers didn't exactly help with that. Even if he wasn't towering over them, scaring them more than he ever did when he was smaller, he could still feel the strange energy crackling inside him, dangerous, foreign, alive. His leg throbbed, but not more than usual. Still, something told him his smart son would be very cross if he walked on it. Where was his smart son anyway? He'd wanted so badly to introduce his sons to his master, show them off while they were still small. Tangshin would have loved that. Her little grandsons, all growing up so fast. But first he needed to get up. Wait, no. He shouldn't do that. He knew better than that. Use ma poyar. Think of being late. Right? His powers. Letting go of the feeling of weight was simple enough, like slipping into a warm bath. A moment later, he found himself floating, light as a feather. Rat balloon. Yoichi giggled somewhere in the back of his mind. Splinter grinned. He liked the ghosts that lived in his head. They were kind. Not like that other Uriai who had scared his sons so, and definitely not like any yokai. He didn't think he was very good at dealing with demons. Although, hadn't he done that once? Or maybe it was his sons. His memory was a bit off. That was okay. He had his master. He had his mate. He had his little ones. And once Tang Shen and the boys came home, they could all be together. Wouldn't that be nice? And then something grabbed his ankle and yanked him down with a thump. He landed in a heap on the floor, blinking dazedly up at his master, who now loomed over him with an unmistakable glare. I don't think you're supposed to be out of bed, the man said, arms crossed. And definitely not using a quirk you haven't been cleared for. Splinter's ears drooped immediately. Shame prickled down his spine. He knew better. Even with this overwhelming urge to take care of his master now that he could, he still knew not to run around when he was injured. That was foolish. That was reckless. He didn't want to worry anyone. Busted. Another of the ghosts muttered mournfully. Splinter whimpered faintly and tucked his tail close. He hadn't meant to upset Master. That was never his intention. Maybe he should just go back to the nice soft nest. Just for a little longer. He didn't want to be a bad example for the little ones, after all. They were watching. Always watching. Nedzu's ears twitched at the sound of soft, childish giggles. That, in itself, wasn't unusual. He remembered extending an invitation to the Hamato family, offering them sanctuary and protection under the roof of a pro-hero. What was unusual, however, was the deep, rhythmic rumble echoing through the room. It took him a moment to recognize the sound purring. That was odd. Nedzu didn't have a cat. He couldn't have a cat. Too many of the predator-prey instincts tangled up in his DNA made felines an unpredictable trigger. He couldn't be sure whether he'd scare them off, or if they'd see him as lunch. Then the realization hit, and heat rushed to his face. The sound wasn't coming from a cat. It was coming from him. He hadn't even known he could purr. Not surprising, really. The scientists who had engineered him had been more interested in results than kindness, and certainly hadn't cared to comfort or nurture. And from what little he knew of feline behavior, purring only happened when a cat felt safe. The sound of a phone camera shutter broke the silence. He cracked an eye open to find his pup leaning against the bedroom doorway, phone in hand, a sheet-eating grin stretching across his face. Nedzu didn't even need to ask what had prompted it, because sometime during the night, it seemed he'd swapped places with Eri. Now, he was curled under Splinter's chin, the older rat's arm draped over his middle. The same shadowy tendrils from the previous night had returned, looping protectively around both of them like living sentinels. And of course, the children were already up, standing behind Aizawa. He really should have expected that. What he hadn't expected was that they would wake before him. He never slept in. Between relentless nightmares and his overactive intellect constantly racing to solve the world's problems, rest had always been elusive. But apparently, even that habit wasn't immune to old instincts. Pack instincts. That was the hardest part of navigating hero society. If he leaned too far into his instincts, people would call him an animal, unfit for leadership. If he ignored them, he was left hollow, stretched thin by decades of suppression. He'd thought that avoiding those urges had kept him in control. But the way he'd slept truly, restfully slept for the first time in ages told a different story. Maybe it was time to talk to Ryu. Though maybe he didn't have to. He'd rather enjoyed that impromptu cuddle pile, and it didn't seem like Splinter minded even if he'd been loopy, like Chio had warned. If he played his cards right, maybe the other rat would be okay with the occasional cuddle? Assuming, of course, that Splinter didn't wake up regretting the whole thing. There was a good chance that once he came to his senses, he'd pull away. Withdraw. And yet, maybe he wouldn't, and wouldn't that be nice? Despite the warmth and the comfort, and the purring that was still gently happening in his own throat, Nedzu knew he couldn't linger. He was the principal of UA. And there was work to do. Awareness returned slowly. And with it, the realization of exactly what he'd done the night before. He'd all but kidnapped that poor man, mistaking them for his long-dead master, and dragged all of them into the nest. Oh, did anyone get the license plate of that truck that hit us last night? Yoichi groaned in his head. Privately, Splinter agreed. His entire body ached. His head felt like the aftermath of a psychic assault, worse even than the time a creature had forced nightmarish visions into his mind. Worse than the Utrum healing tank, when he'd woken up screaming because everything hurt. Because now, it wasn't just his headache. No, he was fairly certain the ghosts in his head were in pain too, though how that was possible, he didn't know. And then it hit him, like a thrown sigh to the heart, what he'd done. The fog cleared just enough to remember curling around that man, the children, and someone purring. Good, you're looking more aware now. The man in question, the one he'd mistaken for Yoshi, said gruffly. Tell Nedzu I'm headed out. I'll see you at school. Splinter nodded mutely. The door shut behind him with a satisfying click. Relief crashed over him like a wave, hot and prickling. He didn't have to face that man. Not yet. And maybe he wouldn't bring it up. Maybe they could both pretend it hadn't happened. But then, somewhere beneath the thick layers of embarrassment, shame, and exhaustion, a tiny, traitorous part of him was grateful. That chaotic tangle of limbs and warmth last night, accidental or not, had offered something he hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not the cautious, ever-alert rest he'd learned to take in the sewers with 4 turtle tots curled against him. Not the brief dozes between scavenging missions, or the lighter-than-air meditations that passed for sleep in the early days when he hadn't even known what to feed them. No, last night he had slept. Truly slept. And he felt the absence of fear like a missing tooth. You're awake. The voice was calm, sharp, and laced with amusement. Splinter looked up to see the one he thought was his mate last night, Nedzu. Yes, that was the name. Nedzu smiled, something kind glinting in his clever eyes. The children are already at the table, but I thought you and I should talk first. adult to adult. Splinter sat up, every muscle protesting. But this was awkward. It's not awkward if no one makes it awkward, and he didn't seem to mind. Yuichi chirped cheerfully. I apologize, he said stiffly. I am not usually so forward. He could almost hear Michelangelo snickering. Should we be giving this guy the shovel talk now? Nedzu handed him a mug of tea, real tea, fragrant and warm, and Splinter accepted it like a lifeline. No harm was done, Nedzu said kindly. But I'll be direct with you. You and your family have done an amazing job surviving on your own. However, with your newly awakened Quirk and Aries abilities, I don't think remaining a free agent is a viable option. Splinter nodded slowly. He'd known that on some level. Known that drifting through this world without alliances or protection would end poorly. The power within him had made that very clear. It pulsed, eager and watchful, not content with inaction. What do I need to do? He asked. Simple, Nedzu said. You're going to be fast-tracked into a teaching position. You'll be replacing All Might as the heroics fundamentals instructor. Splinter nearly choked on the tea. I have no formal education, he admitted. And I've only ever trained 6 students, my sons, and now Izuku and Eri. Nedzu's smile didn't falter. They didn't give me an education either, he said softly. But I'm owed quite a few favors. We can ensure you get the qualifications. In the meantime, you'll learn on the job. I'll help you become the teacher you want to be. We can help too. Yuichi said brightly. We were all heroes or close enough. And you've got the current number 1 right here in your skull. Once he starts talking, he'll be an excellent teacher. Splinter nodded slowly, absorbing it. There's one more thing, Nedzu said. We're going to have Aizawa train you for the hero licensing exam. You'll take it around the same time the students go for their provisional licenses. Splinter blinked. You want me to be a hero? Part of him flashed to Mikey's old nickname Turtle Titan. Why? He asked. You'd think drawing less attention would be the goal. Ordinarily, yes, Nedzu said, tone amused. But being officially classified as a hero places you under the HPSC's oversight and protection. If you're just a teacher with no papers and no history, you're vulnerable. If you're a hero, well, you're valuable. Also, Nedzu added with a wink, the more attention on you publicly, the harder it is for certain parties to make you quietly disappear. You should do it, Dad, Izuku called from the other room. It'll give us more protection. Splinter exhaled slowly. The ghosts murmured their agreement. And somewhere, he knew Mikey was definitely laughing and insisting that he had to have an awesome hero name to match that of the Turtle Titan. Splinter took another sip of tea. He hadn't expected to start over in this world. He certainly hadn't expected to start teaching again. But if it meant keeping his children safe, then he'd do it. Even if it meant getting a ridiculous hero name. Being given a new look by Nedzu did not calm his nerves. Though it was nice to have something other than the yokai April and his other sons had forced on him. He misses them. Even if Eri and Izuku need him more, and he's starting to kind of enjoy Nedzu's company, he misses them. Even if he knows that by now they will have found his letter, they would understand him attaching himself to Izuku in the same way he had them. Because Leonardo was strict but kind, Michelangelo would laugh and welcome his new siblings with open arms, Donatello would have a ball talking the science of quirks with Izuku, and Raphael would enjoy the competition from superpowered children. He supposed it helped that before he was taken to the staff room to meet all the teachers, Mei had tackled him, told him her moms missed them, but told him she understood when he showed off his new appendages, Black Whip, that he tended to use as a better walking staff and a really good shield. Daigoro laughed and said, at least you're using them, though I'm surprised they respond to anything but anger. The ghosts in his head were all giving him confidence. Though it almost fades, knowing he will have to leave Eri with Nedzu. Not that he doesn't trust Nedzu. The principal had shown he was a good partner, a good person willing to roll with the punches as much as he himself did. But some part of him, perhaps the ninja, perhaps the animal, does not like the attention any more than it did the first day he'd gotten here. Hey! He puts his paws over his ears, wincing. Oh, sorry man, just happy to greet a new colleague. I should know better than to be loud near someone with enhanced hearing. Sit down, everyone. He takes a seat, holding on to Eri for extra support. She squeezes his paw. If she can be brave, so can he, even if being in front of adult humans made his fur crawl. Introduce yourselves, everyone. Yamada Hizashi, English teacher. Aizawa Shoyuta, 1A homeroom, ethics and law teacher. He flushes as he remembers this one being the one who'd taken the picture of him and Nedzu cuddling. He hopes the man has not shown that around. Not that he's embarrassed about the unexpected relationship with Nedzu. Only that he wasn't sure how safe it was for others to know. Ken Sekijiro, 1B homeroom teacher. Snipe, 2A homeroom and firearms instructor. Lunch rush. Home Hisi and chef. Kayama Namuri, hero art and Hisi ed teacher, and I have to say, your daughter is so cute. His ears flatten, and Black Whip covers Eri reflexively. He'll have to work on that. But Eri doesn't seem to mind. He can feel her relaxing as if she's just as nervous as he is. Hamato Splinter, the one currently hiding under Black Whip, is my daughter Hamato Eri. I ask that any staff who interact with her do so slowly. She was not treated well by her previous caregivers. And I suppose I am the new heroics teacher. I'm new to teaching large classes, and I hope you will all be willing to give me advice. I am in your care. After that, he has to slowly retract Black Whip and hand over Eri, even if he doesn't want to. Then he heads to the big gym where Aizawa and Ken are waiting, the two classes looking up at him with curiosity. Two students made his breath catch. The first is invisible, but he should probably tell her he can sort of see her, and that he knows she is naked, other than the gloves and boots that make up her costume. That is wholly inappropriate for a costume, but he's not going to tell her until he has a moment she's not in front of her peers. The other is the girl in the front row. Her green skin, her whole appearance makes him pause. Because if she weren't a girl, and was missing a shell, he'd almost think it was one of his sons. He recovered quickly. Hello, Class 1A and 1B. My name is Hamato Splinter, and yes, Hamato Izuku is my son. He will get no special treatment. I will be honest with you all, I have never been in a classroom. I have had a total of 6 students before, 4 of whom are beyond my reach now. He pauses and one of the kids asks, "Are you okay?" It's the kid who reminds him of his sons. He flashes an unconvincing smile. I am fine. As I was saying, I do not have traditional schooling, but I do have in-person experience, as terrifying as it was sometimes. I will endeavor to be a good teacher to you all. You may call me Sensei or Splinter. That is all. And then he sets up the same test he'd given his own sons. For at a time, a candle tells them to come at him. Danger sense pairs well with his own already in-tune senses. Though he's very ill at the way that causes him to actually see the invisible kid in all her glory for a split second before he pushed her out of the ring he'd set up. All of them look not impressed with him, and he's happy that some seem to have a foundation in hand-to-hand, including the kid with the tail who moves as if he has some experience in a martial art. That one had come the closest to giving him trouble. At lunch, he sits with the other teachers, asking an excited Eri all about her day. She tells him all about how Mama Nedzu let her color, causing Nedzu to blush, Splinter to correct her, only to have Nedzu say he didn't mind the moniker. It's almost like being home with his sons. He still wishes they were there. Only when the day ends, does he get stopped by a growling blonde who demands he get a chance to show off too, and pops off some explosions in his fist. Splinter may not have schooling, but he isn't stupid. He can make the connection between this loud blonde and the scars on his son's arms. Izuku, Eri, go home with Nedzu. I can deal with this. Nedzu puts a paw on his arm. Is there a problem? This one is the one who put the scars on my son. If he wishes to show off, to show me why I should train him, then I will oblige. Inside, rage is building. How dare this little sheet demand anything from him? And a glance at his son, who is shaking with his own repressed anger, he says, on second thought, Izuku, why don't you show him what you have learned? And Izuku looks at him, looks at the blonde, and then he gets a look like he is determined to prove something. They go back to the gym where he had introduced himself. The blonde is still sparking menacingly. I'm going to kill you, Deku. You never should have come here, taken my place in heroics. That's not my name, Bakugo. My name is Hamato Izuku. And I'm not a kid anymore. I don't have to take your explosions, knowing no one will care that you're hurting me. I won't have to hide injuries from a mother who never cared. I won't have to dumb myself down because heaven forbid anyone do better than perfect Katsuki. It was cute when we were little, Bakugo. When you couldn't read properly. I'm not a Deku, I never have been. Even if I'd never developed my quirk. What the F are you talking about? You'll see. The gym was silent again. Not the anticipatory silence of curious students. No clatter of boots or gossip from the bleachers. Just a still, raw emptiness filled with the scent of ozone and rage. Izuku stood across from Bakugo, barefoot, hoodie tied at his waist, the fabric of his loose gi fluttering from the small gusts Bakugo's sparks created. He hadn't taken a stance yet. He didn't need to. Splinter stood between them, watching. Sensing. He could feel the venom curling in Bakugo's aura. And beneath it? Fear. Not of Izuku's power. Not of Splinter himself. Fear of being left behind. Splinter stepped back. Begin. Bakugo moved first. A blinding blast of propulsion closed the distance, his right arm ped for a detonation that would have floored most adults. But it didn't hit. Izuku pivoted. A turn of the hip. The barest shift of weight. And Bakugo's momentum carried him forward too far. His own power betrayed him. Izuku moved like water. Palm to the back of Bakugo's elbow redirected him into the mats. No strike. Just technique. Bakugo scrambled up with a snarl. Fight me for real. I am, Izuku said, calm as ice. You're holding back. No. I'm just not relying on my quirk. Bakugo blinked. Then exploded. The fight spiraled. Bakugo attacked like a storm, all force and fury wide swings, palm blasts, aerial bursts to fake Izuku out midair. But nothing worked. Izuku ducked under each swing. Deflected every charge. His footwork was patient, efficient. He moved in circles, tracing rings around Bakugo like a predator letting prey exhaust itself. Splinter recognized it instantly. The fourth kata. Shadow loop. Every time Bakugo swung. Izuku wasn't there. Every time he launched an explosion. Izuku was already mid-roll, launching a sweep for his legs. And each time he connected, it hurt. Bakugo was strong. But Izuku fought with purpose, precision. No wasted movement, no desperate yelling. Just breath and form and months of discipline crammed into a boy who was done being the victim. Bakugo landed one hit. A solid shoulder check with a palm blast. Izuku grunted as he hit the wall, breath knocked loose. But even then, he pushed off, hands flat against the wall, and flipped over Bakugo before he could follow up. Landed behind him. And then struck. Palm to the gut, elbow to the ribs, knee to the thigh. Bakugo stumbled. You're fast, he muttered. Izuku was already circling. You trained her? Got strong, cause of that freak. Izuku said nothing. And what you think that makes up for everything? Makes you better than me? Izuku stepped in. Faster than before. 1, 2, 3 steps. Bakugo raised an arm too late. Izuku dropped low. Swept the leg. Bakugo fell back, feet yanked from under him. Airborne for just a second. And then, flat on the mat. The air left his lungs. He gasped. And found himself pinned. Izuku's foot pressed into his chest not with cruelty, but with clarity. Face calm. Eyes unflinching. He had won. I win, Izuku said. His voice was steady. Bakugo tried to rise. Couldn't. I didn't use my quirk, Izuku continued. I didn't need it to beat you. The air crackled around them, still heavy with residual sparks. Bakugo's lip bled. I've trained for months, Izuku said softly. Not to beat you. Not to prove you wrong. But to prove myself right. That I was never Deku. That I never deserved what you did to me. The pain. The ridicule. The scars. Bakugo flinched, barely noticeable, but Splinter saw it. I'm not here to take your spot. I'm here to save people. Even if those people once hurt me. Izuku leaned in, just enough for Bakugo to really see him. Not the scrawny kid from Aldra. Not the stammering fanboy. Not the punching bag. But a warrior. A Hamato. Grow the F up, Izuku said. Be the hero I know you can be. He stepped back. Bakugo didn't move. Not immediately. Splinter walked over as Izuku turned toward him. He could see the boy shaking, not from fear but from the adrenaline crash of release. The fight was over. But the war inside him wasn't. Dad? Izuku asked, voice cracking slightly. Did I do the right thing? Splinter nodded. Put a paw on his shoulder. You did not fight with hate. I wanted to. But you didn't. That's what makes you better than him. Izuku nodded. And left the gym in silence. Bakugo lay there a few seconds longer. The cold gym mats beneath him. His arms spread wide. Staring at the ceiling like it had answers. He wasn't crying. Not yet. But something was cracking. A memory. Izuku crying after a particularly cruel explosion during middle school. The way Deku had cringed away from him the next day at school and how that had made him feel. It hadn't made him feel good. It hadn't made him feel like he was a hero. It hadn't made him feel like Izuku's hero or his friend. Were they ever friends? Not anymore. Not then. But maybe. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Splinter sat in the darkness of the small living room, cross-legged on a cushion, unmoving. The only sound was the hum of city life outside the glass and the occasional creak of the old building settling. The moonlight through the window spilled in slivers across the floor, catching faint glints of fur and steel-gray whiskers. He was not meditating, not truly. His breathing was steady, but his thoughts were not. He thought of his sons. He always thought of his sons. He wondered if Michelangelo still painted on the walls when he was bored. If Donatello had finally upgraded the shell cell batteries like he'd sworn to do for 2 years. If Raphael had found someone to trust with that heavy, stubborn heart of his. If Leonardo still trained too hard when no one was watching. He missed them with a depth that words couldn't reach. But they were grown now. Grown into almost adults. Warriors. Heroes in their own right. They had outgrown the small den he'd built for them beneath New York. They had outgrown him as they were meant to. That was the role of a parent, wasn't it? To raise your children so well that one day they no longer needed you. So why did it hurt so much? He closed his eyes, fur bristling faintly with the ache in his chest. He thought of the pain, the years underground, the struggle to be both father and sensei. He thought of the pride that bloomed in him the day Michelangelo won his first Battle Nexus tournament. The day Leonardo gave orders and the others followed without hesitation. The day Donatello cried over a patient he'd saved. The day Raphael didn't fight back. They were no longer boys. He was no longer needed. He told himself that was a good thing. So why did he feel so hollow? Letting go never gets easier, a voice said from beside him, gentle, maternal, sad. Splinter didn't startle. The ghostly presence of Nana Shimura settled beside him, soft and golden in the moonlight, as though she were made of memory and firelight. They're not gone, Nana said, just grown. And you're not alone. He glanced sideways at her, but didn't speak. I used to think, she continued quietly, that I'd always be able to protect my child. That I could shoulder the pain of the world, so he wouldn't have to. She paused. I was wrong. There was a long silence between them, filled with more honesty than words could carry. I gave him up, she said. My son. After my husband died. It was the hardest choice I ever made. I was scared that the villains would find him, that they'd use him to hurt me. Or that I'd fail him entirely. I thought I was doing the right thing. Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't. I'll never really know. Her voice cracked then, just slightly. But I missed everything. His first words. His first steps. I wasn't there when he scraped his knees or learned to ride a bike. I gave up my family for the sake of peace and it broke something in me I never got back. She smiled sadly. And I think I tried to replace that. With Tashinori. There was a shuffle behind them, and All Might's form appeared at the edge of the light, half-shadowed in the doorway. His voice was quiet, smaller than anyone would expect from the former symbol of peace. I didn't mind. Splinter turned, surprised at the sorrow in the man's eyes. I was an orphan. No name. No quirk. No one wanted me. I was too tall, too quiet, too weird. I watched all the other kids get adopted week after week. I told myself I didn't care. He stepped into the room, hands folded, shoulders bowed like a man much older than he looked. When I aged out of the system, I was determined to prove myself. To show that a quirkless person could be a hero. I took on too many fights and eventually got in over my head. Then she found me, he said. This loud, brash woman with fire in her eyes. She told me I reminded her of someone she'd lost, and I didn't know how to feel about that. But then she trained me, laughed with me, scolded me. She never said it out loud, but I felt like I had a mom for the first time in my life. He glanced at Nana, then at Splinter. She wasn't perfect. But I didn't need perfect. I needed someone to believe in me. And you, Nana added gently, turning to Splinter, have done the same for your sons. And now, you've done it again. For Izuku. For Toshinori. For us. Splinter closed his eyes. His throat tightened. You haven't lost your family, Splinter, Nana whispered. It's just grown. It's changed shape. You still carry them with you, but now, you have a son who won't stop asking questions, a daughter who is finding her laughter because of you, and a partner who needed a person to understand. All Might laughed weakly. And it doesn't mean you love your sons any less, Nana finished. It just means your heart was big enough to love more. Splinter exhaled, long and slow. The ache in his chest didn't vanish. But it shifted from sharp grief to soft remembrance. From sorrow to something warmer. Yes, he said finally. They do not need me in the same way. But that does not mean they do not need me. And you, Nana said with a smile, are allowed to need them too. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. This silence was full of ghosts and love and old regrets. And hope. The next day dawned cold and overcast, as though the weather itself had caught wind of the sports festival and decided to match Izuku's mood. He should have been excited. He used to dream about this. Watching from behind a screen, clutching All Might memorabilia like a lifeline, imagining what he'd do if he had a quirk. He'd fantasized about standing on that stage, the wind in his hair, cheers ringing in his ears. But now the thought of stepping onto a track with thousands of eyes on him made his stomach twist. He had a quirk, sure. A powerful one. But he still barely knew how to use it. He was already dealing with media rumors about the Nomu, whispers about what his teacher, his dad, had done. If he messed up out there, he didn't just fear embarrassment. He feared what it would say about him. And then, just to make the morning worse, a group of students was blocking the exit to their classroom. Kids in different uniforms. Different emblems. Class 1B. A blonde kid was at the front, smug and too loud, practically bouncing on the ball of his feet like he'd rehearsed this moment. Well, if it isn't the stars of the show, he said, mock clapping. Here to hog more attention, are you? Maybe milk another tragedy? Because clearly, you guys are what UA is all about now: chaos, destruction, and endless press. Excuse us, you are blocking the exit? Ida yelled, waving his hands robotically. Oh please, the blonde scoffed. You 1A kids act like you're already heroes. You think just because a few villains showed up and you were lucky enough to survive, that somehow makes you better than the rest of us. You weren't there, Uraraka said quietly. But the blonde wasn't listening. His voice rose, theatrical and sharp. The truth is, we're all students. The only difference is that you got your spotlight first. And the rest of us? We're tired of standing in your shadow. Must be nice, the blonde continued, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. To have a heroic quirk. To always be told you could be a hero. People like me? We don't get that. Not with quirks like mine. His eyes narrowed. But I can fix that. I'm Monoma Nito, and I'm going to prove that us 1B kids should not be forgotten. And that was it. That was the final match struck against the Tinder. You're unbelievable, Izuku said. Monoma blinked. What? Were you there? Izuku asked, stepping forward, voice tight. At the USJ? When the villains attacked. When we were fighting for our lives and praying someone would come. When I had to drag someone to safety with a quirk I didn't understand while my ribs were broken and I could barely breathe. Silence dropped like a curtain. Did you bleed for your spot? Izuku snapped. Did you scream while your friends were being mauled, knowing you couldn't help them? Did you spend the night wondering if your teacher, your dad, was going to make it through surgery? Monoma didn't answer. Izuku's voice dropped lower. Steadier. My quirk nearly killed me when it showed up. My mom begged me to give this dream up because she thought it would bury me. I wasn't handed anything. I clawed my way here. Inch by inch. His eyes burned not with tears, but with something brighter. So don't stand there and talk to me about fairness. Monoma opened his mouth again, but Izuku raised a hand, stopping him cold. You want to talk unfair? He asked. Tell it to Hagakure, who you can't even see. Tell it to Ojiro, who got in here with nothing but a tail. You failed because you relied on your quirk. And a good hero? They're more than a one-trick pony. A flicker of hurt crossed Monoma's face, then anger buried it. You think I didn't fight? I think you're mad you didn't win, Izuku said. And I get that. I do. But don't you dare try to erase what we went through. Behind the crowd, someone stirred. Izuku's gaze drifted to the edge of the hallway where Katsuki stood, arms crossed, silent. Not in 1A. Not in 1B. Katsuki didn't speak. But his lips moved. I'm sorry. Izuku didn't flinch. Didn't nod. Just turned back, walked to his desk, grabbed his water bottle, and stepped through the gap in the crowd. No dramatics. No slamming doors. Just gone. And the silence he left behind was louder than anything he'd said. At the far end of the hall, hidden just around the corner, Aizawa stood leaning against the wall, arms folded, eyes narrowed. He'd heard every word. And the worst part was? He understood it. All of it. That other boy Monoma, he hadn't introduced himself at first. But now Aizawa had a name to the face. He'd always let the whole rivalry thing between 1A and 1B go because he could care less. He and Ken had different teaching styles. But this? Well, this was something different. The bitterness. The frustration. The quiet fury of someone told all his life he wasn't enough. It reminded him of someone. Himself. 15 years ago, looking up at a system that saw his quirk and laughed. And it terrified him. Because if Monoma kept going down this path, blaming others, spitting venom, trying to prove his worth with rage, he wouldn't become a hero. He'd become Aizawa. And one of him? One was already too many. Training superpowered children wasn't all that different from raising his sons, surprisingly. The basics still applied. Patience, routine, and teaching control. Meditation and simple hand-to-hand foundations were often enough to have the children beaming after class. The vestiges in his mind were surprisingly helpful too, offering advice on how best to guide the students in quirk training. For Kaminari, they suggested he try to turn down the voltage. Splinter wasn't quite sure what that meant, but Kaminari seemed to understand, and that was what mattered. Academically, he still lagged behind. Nedzu had been tutoring him personally, often in the quiet of his office. The principal had a calm, gentle teaching style, explaining things in a way that made sense to Splinter. And Splinter found unexpectedly that he didn't mind sitting with someone and just listening, letting them help him untangle the confusion. He thought Donatello would find it amusing that he was finally learning science and technology properly. Though he still didn't trust computers. Logically, he knew the chance of being turned into data and scattered across the internet again was low. But still he avoided touching them when he could help it. Then there was Hagakure. He'd taken her aside gently and told her, "I can see you." Her reaction had been immediate. She'd flushed, eyes wide with something between hope and sorrow. "Really?" she whispered, stepping in close, far too close. In a panic, he'd activated smokescreen, more from instinct than intent. This was a child. A naked child. He could still hardly believe that was allowed. "Yes," he said, voice firming as the smoke cleared. "And if I can see you, then others may be able to as well. Why don't you get into your gym uniform for now? We'll talk to Aizawa about the lack of a proper costume. I'm sure he can help find a solution." She'd nodded, quietly grateful, and slipped away. Then he turned to Yaoyorozu. "As for you," he said gently, I'm not sure how comfortable you really are with showing that much skin. I understand your quirk requires exposure, but I don't think you enjoy it. She blinked in surprise, then followed his gaze to the makeshift bookshelf she'd installed into her costume. If you fall on that, he said, you're asking for a spinal injury. You should talk to Aizawa too. Her shoulders sagged with visible relief. I've been so uncomfortable, she admitted softly. But my parents, they were the ones who approved the costume. They said it would improve my quirk's efficiency, but you're right. I hate how exposed I feel. He nodded, not judging, just understanding. It wasn't much, but sometimes just being seen, truly seen, was enough. The teacher's lounge was unusually quiet for once, save for the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of chopsticks on bento lids. At one table, Splinter sat cross-legged with Izuku and Eri nestled beside him, carefully helping the little girl open a juice box while Izuku eagerly recounted some school story involving a runaway training bot. At another table, Aizawa was just settling in with his lunch when his phone vanished from the table. Hisashi, he said flatly, not even looking up. Babe, Hisashi cooed back, already grinning as he scrolled through the phone. What's this? Aizawa finally looked up just in time to see Hisashi holding the phone aloft like it was a trophy. On the screen was a photo Aizawa had snapped during that first night where Splinter had been loopy and had been cuddling Nedzu like a demented plushie. Nedzu had been tucked under Splinter's chin, and those strange black tendrils had looped over them both like sentinels. He'd snapped it for blackmail. It wasn't like he was going to share it, just get some payback for all the photos that Nedzu had of him and Hisashi when they'd started dating. What's it look like? Aizawa asked, trying to sound irritated, but his voice came out more tired than anything. And why are you stealing my phone again? I was gonna call Tensei. Tell him we've got another unofficial nephew. What? You know Hamato Izuku, Hisashi said with a grin. Splinter's his dad, right? And Nedzu basically raised you, which makes you our weird goblin father-in-law. Nephew by association. You're ridiculous. And you love it. No, Aizawa said, but there was the faintest upturn at the corner of his mouth. I tolerate it. Nemuri sauntered in, draping herself over Hisashi's shoulders with the ease of a practiced cat. They do look cute together, don't they? Aizawa scowled just a little. If it had been anyone else touching Hisashi, he might have told them to remove their hand or had them forcibly reminded why personal space existed. But this was Nemuri. And deep down, they were all used to each other's odd boundaries. We should set them up on a date, she said, teasing. Aizawa snorted. I don't think either of them even knows what a date is. Nedzu's never shown interest in anyone before, and Splinter, the yukata he wore when he showed up, was held together by string and stubbornness. He was probably homeless most of his life. I don't think anyone's shown him kindness in a long time. Hisashi's grin softened, his voice quieter now. Then maybe we should fix that. Plan something nice. I could take the kids on a tour of the station or something, play Uncle Hisashi for the day. Aizawa groaned, rubbing his eyes. Why are you like this? Because love is in the air, babe, Hisashi sing-songed. And you could get more blackmail photos, Nemuri added, sipping her coffee. Aizawa paused, almost unwillingly considering it. You're not wrong. Nedzu, he deserves something nice. He took me in when no one else would. I might not be a romantic, but even I can tell they care for each other. There's something real there. He sighed, dragging a hand through his hair. Fine. Let's do it. But low-key. No grand gestures, no fireworks. Just something quiet. Hisashi beamed. That's all I needed to hear. As the school day was ending, Nedzu received a message on his private device. It was short and accompanied by far too many winking emojis. Boss Rat, will take the kiddos for the night. Enjoy some adult time, smiley face. Hisashi. Nedzu blinked at the screen. Then again. His fur fluffed just slightly as he flushed, not from embarrassment exactly, but from unfamiliarity. Because he'd never felt this way before. He'd known affection in a theoretical sense. He understood loyalty, trust, even the quiet comfort of companionship from years of watching his students and colleagues. But this gentle warmth in his chest, This peace that curled around his ribs whenever Splinter was near this was new. His creators hadn't cared for his emotional development. He'd been a project, a weapon, a puzzle. And in turn he'd relied on intellect to suppress the instincts baked into his DNA, the wild parts, the pack parts. He'd kept them dormant for so long he'd nearly forgotten they existed. But the more time he spent with Splinter, and with Izuku and Eri, his ears twitched as he set the device down. When they got home, the quiet room was filled with the faint sound of a kettle beginning to boil. In the next room, Splinter waited with a teacup already in hand, serene as always, but his tail was twitching faintly, and Nedzu knew that meant he was content. The part of Nedzu that was animal, that had always been hungry for safety and kin, felt fed. And for the first time in a very long while, he let it stay fed. If he was being honest, it was nice. Unexpectedly, wonderfully nice. Having a partner who didn't flinch at his sharper teeth or strange habits. Who didn't speak over him or treat him as something other. Who smelled of warm fur and jasmine tea, and who let silence sit comfortably between them. They didn't need anything fancy. Just quiet companionship. Some shared tea. And of course, the cuddles. Maybe humans would call it a relationship. Nedzu wasn't sure what label to give it, and he didn't really care. He only knew that he was happy. And for once in his life, that was enough.